Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Joanne Nelson. Joanne Nelson was a cheerful and intelligent young woman who values the happiness of her loved ones over her own. Growing up in Hull, also known as Kingston upon Hull, on the east coast of Yorkshire, England, she lived with her parents. Her mother was a teaching assistant, and her father, Charlie, worked as an engineer for the city council. Joanne has a bubbly personality and excels both academically and socially. She is active in sports, enjoying netball, racquetball, and swimming. Although she is happy, she always dreamed of having her own family. Joanne originally pursued a career in medicine but found the role of a nurse difficult. She considered working abroad but eventually chose to work at a job center in Hull to be closer to family and friends. Joanne enjoys helping people find jobs and improve their skills, finding fulfillment in improving the lives of others. One day Joanne meets Paul. Before meeting Joanne, Paul had been in a number of serious relationships. In 1993, during his college years, he dated Carrie Thompson. Their relationship was short-lived, but Carrie reported Paul's violent behavior to the police. During arguments, he became violent, punching walls and assaulting Carrie. In 1999, Paul met Jenny Mary Clark. They married just 2 weeks after meeting, but their marriage quickly became a nightmare. On their wedding night, Paul attacked Jenny, and the abuse continued. He even choked her until she passed out. Despite these problems, Paul and Jenny decided to have children. Their daughter, Chloe, was born in 2000, and Paul and Jenny divorced shortly thereafter. When Chloe was 5, Jenny met Joanne and immediately recognized the challenges Joanne would face with Paul, as she seemed too naive to deal with such a difficult man. In 2002, Paul ended his relationship with Jenny and began dating Joanne Nelson. Their relationship began on the streets, where Paul worked as a bouncer in bars and clubs. At 27, he was experienced in relationships, while Joanne, 19, was just entering adulthood. Despite the age difference, they found support in each other, both seeking independence from their parents. Initially, they lived with Paul's mother before eventually buying their own home. However, their happiness gradually faded. Their arguments and conflicts increased. For Joanne, everything became too mundane and boring. Their differences began to strain the relationship. For example, she loved to be neat, while Paul was indifferent to it. On February 14, 2005, Joanne did not show up for work, which was unusual and worrying. On Valentine's Day 2005, Joanne Nelson mysteriously went missing. Paul was the one who reported the matter to the police. He claimed that he last saw Joanne when she was sleeping, then he left home and went to work. When he returned home, she had disappeared without a trace. Joanne, then 22, disappeared, leaving her family and friends extremely worried. The situation became even more confusing when she missed the funeral of her best friend's father and did not wish her younger sister Katie a happy 19th birthday. After the police declared Joanne missing, a large-scale search operation was launched, involving many law enforcement officers, the military, and volunteers. Since Joanne's disappearance, Joanne's father has been suspicious of Paul. Meanwhile, Katie finds it hard to believe that Paul is involved in this case because Paul has been actively involved in the search for Joanne. Paul has been working with volunteers and Joanne's family and friends. He also gave interviews to the press without the permission of Joanne's family. In a phone conversation with a reporter, Paul claimed that he had nothing to do with Joanne's disappearance. Paul asserted that his love for Joanne was real and that he could not harm her. However, a facial expression expert, Cliff, analyzed Paul's behavior during a television interview and found several suspicious signs. First, Paul did not close his eyes when talking about Joanne, which is not common for a grieving person. Second, Paul did not try to shed tears when talking about his lover. These unusual behaviors made people question whether Paul's words were truly sincere. Paul, the man who was involved in Joanne's disappearance, was eventually arrested after his mother disclosed information about his actions to the police. When questioned, Paul confessed that he had killed Joanne during an argument on Valentine's Day 2005. He said that the argument stemmed from Joanne constantly criticizing him for not doing his chores, especially when she asked him to help her wash her clothes, which angered him. When Joanne announced her plans to leave and forced him to sell the house, Paul became even angrier. In a fit of rage, Paul killed Joanne with his bare hands. He then remained calm and began to plan how to cover up the crime. He went to his mother's house, took a gardening tool, and chatted with the neighbors. He then went to the store to buy the necessary items for removing the evidence, including bin bags, rubber gloves, and disinfectant spray. The lead investigator discovered fingernail marks on the back of Paul's hand, which indicated that he had participated in the murder. This evidence confirmed Paul's confession and proved that he had committed the murder. Surveillance videos from a store near the scene of the crime showed Paul acting surprisingly calmly. Using the items he had purchased, he bound Joanne's hands and feet, stuffed her in a bag, and secured it with duct tape. He then carried her body to her car in broad daylight. After Paul hid Joanne's body in the car, he went to fill up with petrol in High Halden. He then drove about 75 miles to Bradbury Woodland, a remote forest near Winteringham in North Yorkshire. There, he carried Joanne's body for about 250 yards until he found a suitable place to bury her, among pine trees. He used branches to cover up the small hole where her body was buried. To cover up the crime, before going to work, Paul made a fake phone call to Joanne to deflect suspicion. The next day, he continued his daily life without showing any remorse for his heinous actions. Paul showed a frightening coldness by concealing his crime and continuing his normal life. After his confession, Paul said he did not remember exactly where he buried Joanne. However, he remembered that he buried Joanne in a metal gate and that there were some green bottles nearby. Detective Higgins said this information was very useful for the search. Because of Paul's suggestions, the police were able to start organizing the search by following a route through the woods. The search for Joanne lasted about 6 weeks and involved many people, including units from 3 counties working together on this grueling task. After 39 agonizing days of waiting, a team of detectives led by Ray Higgins finally found the remains of Joanne, 22, in Bransby near York. They followed Paul's description slowly. After walking about a quarter of a mile, they came upon a hole in the woods. Here they found a rubbish bag with what looked like a leg inside. It was Joanne's body wrapped in the bag. Paul, known for his history of sexual violence against women, kept his dark secrets hidden from Joanne's family and the public until the trial. At the time, he claimed to have mental health problems while working as a bouncer at the club. People who knew him from the gym said he often caused trouble at clubs and bars. The family later discovered that Paul had been taking steroids in an attempt to become a bodybuilder. Friends said he had previously been an alcoholic and that his rages may have been steroid-induced. Paul attended Sydney Smith School, then Hull College, where he completed a degree in civil engineering. He went on to study at Bishop Burton College, where he completed a degree in horticulture. Paul lived in Saudi Arabia, working with his father, Peter Dyson, in the maintenance industry. He also gained experience as a gardener and later worked as a mechanic for Pinal. From December 2004, Paul worked at Byam Timber on Somerton Road as a timber cutter until his arrest. At 15, he met Colin Allen, a martial arts expert, and they became friends. Paul confessed to the murder to Colin, leading to his arrest. Friends said he had a distorted view of himself, seeing himself as charming and attractive to women. He often used his job as a security guard to approach girls from higher social classes. On the first day of the trial, November 7, 2005, Paul surprised the entire courtroom by pleading guilty. Joanne's family was completely shocked by the confession, as they had anticipated a long, intense trial. When Paul pleaded guilty, Joanne's family said yes in unison. Afterwards, he simply looked straight ahead or kept his head down, avoiding looking at Joanne's relatives and the police. He showed no emotion on his face, even as the charges were announced. His lawyer, Harry Barl, told the court that there was no excuse for his actions. On November 8, nearly 10 months after the murder, Paul was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years to serve. Surprisingly, in November 2019, after just 14 years, Paul, then 45, was transferred to an open prison and released on day release. The reason was that the parole board found that Paul had actively participated in a self-awareness development program and successfully completed a social improvement program. The easing of Paul's detention conditions and his day release caused deep emotional distress for Joanne's family. Katie, Joanne's sister, expressed to the media that they felt lost and unsure of how to handle the news. Paul's release brought back painful memories of Joanne's death, and the family believed he did not deserve a reduced sentence for his actions. Katie emphasized that Paul's crime was serious and premeditated, making his early release a challenging ordeal for the family. They fear he might return to their city of Hull and commit further harm, as they have been unable to secure a restriction order against him. Although there is no confirmed information about Paul's return to the city, he remains under probation supervision. Any violation of his terms or the law will result in his return to prison. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Michael Wayne Jones. Michael Wayne Jones was born on May 1, 1981, in Brattleboro, Vermont. His life was complicated and difficult from a young age. Michael witnessed his parents repeatedly physically and mentally abusing each other, and he himself was also subjected to this abuse. When Michael was young, his father went to prison for unclear reasons, leaving him feeling empty and deeply affected. His mother remarried and had another son, Dana, bringing some happiness to Michael's life. However, their home life remained troubled. Michael's stepfather had trouble maintaining stable employment, which put a financial strain on his mother, forcing her to work 2 jobs to support the family. The stepfather was aggressive toward Michael and Dana. He used physical punishment. This has created an atmosphere that makes people feel scared and controlled. Michael was harshly punished for small mistakes, such as being late to school, and was often locked in a shed and subjected to sexual abuse. Michael's difficult life did not harden him. Instead, he showed kindness and a strong instinct to protect others, particularly his younger brother Dana. He is often the one to admit mistakes and take punishment for Dana, which brings the 2 brothers closer. Dana admired Michael's courage and love. Michael's stepfather was extremely controlling and rarely allowed him to interact with other children. His mother was too afraid of her husband to stand up for Michael or herself. This created a home environment that was isolated, secretive, and oppressive. With no outside help, Michael and Dana suffered ongoing abuse. The neighbors suspected that something was wrong in the household. In a desperate attempt to escape, Michael ran away from home but didn't know where to go. He was eventually found by authorities and shared the sad story of his family life. Unfortunately, no one helped him with his situation. Michael had difficulty expressing his genuine emotions, instead concealing them beneath a facade of indifference. He struggled with depression in his teenage years, which significantly impacted his mental well-being. However, at school, he found some relief from his struggles. Despite being introverted and feeling lonely, having responsibilities helped distract him from his difficult home life. Fortunately, Michael met Dorothy, a local business owner. Dorothy introduced him to her daughter, and although the daughter's name is not known, but Michael formed a strong bond with her. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance, navigating its share of highs and lows. This relationship brought out Michael's gentle, thoughtful, and cautious nature, revealing a more nuanced side of his personality. Dorothy was happy to see Michael in a new light, but at the same time, she felt concerned. She observed that he became uneasy whenever it was time to go home. Despite her daughter's frequent visits with Michael, he made a concerted effort to keep her away from his residence. Concerned by these signs, Dorothy decided to have deeper conversations with Michael. Michael eventually opened up to Dorothy about his concerns for his mother and brother's well-being. This enabled Dorothy to recognize the emotional burden and suffering that Michael was experiencing. After finishing high school, Michael enlisted in the United States Navy, which marked the start of a new chapter in his life. The Navy instills in him a sense of direction and purpose within a highly organized environment. As Michael developed a strong affection for the Navy, he realized that he had made the right choice. His newfound sense of happiness is largely due to his close relationship with his teammates. Although he would occasionally drink, Michael was always responsible and showed up for work, proving to be a calm and composed individual. During this time, Michael was dating a colleague. However, he quickly realized that the relationship was unhealthy when she became violent towards him. This brought back painful memories of his childhood. As his depression worsened, he realized he needed to end the relationship. Following the breakup, Michael dedicated himself to furthering his career. He pursued specialized training in combat medical care, which ultimately led to his appointment as a medic in the Marine Corps. Afterward, Michael met Sarah, and they fell deeply in love, eventually getting married. After getting married, Michael resigned from the Marines so he could devote his time to supporting his wife. Sarah had a positive impact on Michael's life, encouraging him to make good choices. Together, they had 3 children, and Michael was determined to be a devoted father, providing them with the best possible upbringing. In their relationship, Sarah often took the lead in decision-making, but Michael was always supportive of her choices. In 2011, Sarah found a job in Orange County, Central Florida, and the family moved there. She worked at the Mount Dora Animal Hospital, which was managed by Bo Delaporte. After Michael had difficulty finding a job, Sarah convinced Delaporte to take him on. She also emphasized the experience Michael had gained from his previous job. Michael quickly settled into his new role and showed outstanding commitment. Michael emanated happiness and had a clear passion for his work. Michael's positive demeanor made him highly sought after by pet owners. His employers, particularly Delaporte, grew fond of him, and their relationship blossomed into a strong friendship built on trust. Delaporte even entrusted him with some management responsibilities at the animal hospital. In 2014, Delaporte hired KCI, a new veterinary technician. Born on December 23, 1986, in Ion, Indiana, KCI was the second of 3 daughters to Nikki and David. She had 2 siblings, named Sarah and Brandy. She brought immense joy and positivity to her family, and also spread that energy to those around her. As KCI grew older, her love and concern for those around her deepened, fueled by her spiritual beliefs and moral principles. This gives her the strength to face life's challenges. In high school, KCI met Richard, and they were initially attracted to each other. However, as they dated, Richard noticed KCI's jealous and possessive tendencies. Her insecurity sometimes led to hurtful words and actions. Nevertheless, Richard remained patient and calm, and they eventually married after completing their studies. Over time, KCI's mother moved to Florida. Sarah and Brandy soon followed. Due to KCI's close relationship with her family, she and Richard relocated to Florida in 2009. After settling in, KCI worked occasionally as a transporter and sometimes as a dog groomer. She also began learning the trade of a veterinary technician. During this time, Casey and Richard welcomed their first child, Cameron. KCI was devoted to Cameron's well-being and made it her top priority. A few years later, Casey and Richard had their second child, Preston. The children grew in a happy environment filled with laughter and loving care. As KCI advanced in her veterinary technician career, she found a job at an animal clinic. There, she met Michael, who was Delaporte's right-hand man. Michael and KCI got along well, but Delaporte and Sarah both suspect that there may be something more than mere friendship between them. Even though both of them have families, but Michael found himself attracted to KCI. This attraction affected his focus and performance at work. Michael tried his best to satisfy KCI's needs, and she reciprocated Michael's feelings, and as a result they began an affair. Sarah and Michael decided to get a divorce, as did KCI and her spouse, Richard. After the divorce, Sarah was granted custody of her 3 children and relocated to Jacksonville. In contrast, KCI and Richard chose to share custody of their children, Cameron and Preston, according to a certain rule. KCI took her parenting responsibilities seriously and made sure to transport the children as agreed. Delaporte's frustration increased as Michael's work performance at the clinic continued to deteriorate. To make matters worse, Michael inappropriately approached other employees, overstepping professional boundaries. A betrayal occurred when Michael asked for time off, claiming his mother had passed away, only to use the leave for a beach vacation. Delaporte discovered the truth and subsequently terminated Michael's employment. Seeking revenge, Michael burglarized the clinic, stealing money, computer equipment, and even a gun. Delaporte identified Michael as the perpetrator and contacted the authorities. With KCI's assistance, Michael escaped to New Mexico but was eventually caught by the police. After serving a short prison sentence, Michael was released. Despite Michael's past actions, KCI remained devoted to him. The couple moved in together, and Michael became a stepfather to Cameron and Preston. Eventually, in 2017, around Halloween, Michael and KCI got married and started a new life together in a 2-bedroom trailer. Although the space is small, the affordable rent makes them feel grateful to have found a place where they can be together. In the same year, they welcomed their first child, Mercalli, followed by Ayana the next year. As their family grew to 4 children, Michael took on a job as a construction laborer to support them financially, while KCI dedicated herself to being a homemaker. She took great joy in every stage of her children's development and sought ways to capture those special moments. This led her to create a YouTube channel where she shared milestones of their family life. At first glance, their life seemed perfect, with Michael appearing calm and KCI's laughter frequently punctuating their videos. However, their relationship was not as it seemed. Behind closed doors, the couple frequently argued, and their disagreements had become a persistent problem. KCI's distrust of Michael led her to regularly check his phone, and she became suspicious whenever Michael worked late hours. A heated argument broke out between them on the night of July 10, 2019, while their children slept. The argument started when KCI discovered a message on Michael's phone that made her believe he was being adultery. The confrontation quickly turned violent, with KCI grabbing a baseball bat and pushing Michael. Michael then took the bat from her and, in a state of blind fury, he repeatedly struck her until she died. Michael put KCI's body in a plastic bag and hid it in a closet. He tried to clean up the scene as much as he could. The next morning, he took steps to prevent the children from finding out what happened. He then put KCI's body in his car. To avoid raising suspicion, Michael continued to post on KCI's social media accounts in the following days. On July 26, Michael sent a text to Richard, pretending to be KCI, asking him to take care of Preston and Cameron. Michael also texted KCI's mother, asking her to care for Mercalli and Ayana. When Richard arrived to pick up Preston and Cameron, He found it strange that KCI was not there and expressed his concerns to Michael. However, Michael dismissed Richard's concerns, saying KCI had left town for a few days. KCI's mother had a similar reaction when she came to pick up Mercalli and Ayana. Later that day, Michael called Sarah and told her that he and KCI were separating, and he needed to take care of the children while she worked. He then picked up the children and took them to his home. During the drive, the children noticed a strong, unpleasant smell in the car, similar to rotting meat. Michael continued to visit his children at Sarah's residence for 2 weeks, driving back and forth between his home and Sarah. Meanwhile, the body of KCI remained hidden in his car. As the days went by without hearing from her daughter, KCI's mother grew increasingly worried. On August 10th, Richard returned Cameron and Preston to Michael. This time, KCI's absence was even more noticeable, and it increased Michael's concern. During their brief conversation, Michael apologized for causing Richard and KCI to divorce, and acknowledged the challenges Richard went through in his relationship with KCI. As the new school year approached, Michael realized that the absence of the children and KCI would likely raise suspicions among the elementary school staff. This realization led to a tragic turn of events. On a night that remains unspecified, Michael took Cameron out of bed and suffocated him, then placed his body in a suitcase. The next morning, he did the same to Preston, putting his body in a garbage bag. A few days later, the owner of the trailer park where Michael lived served him an eviction notice, giving him 2 weeks to vacate the premises. Amidst this dire situation, Michael went to pick up Mercalli and Ayana. When KCI's mother saw Michael again without KCI, she became overwhelmed with anxiety and had a nervous breakdown. Her mind was consumed by a single question: where was her daughter? Michael was driving with his daughters, Mercalli and Ayana, when he was suddenly overcome with guilt. He felt trapped and decided to turn himself in at the police station. However, when he reached the door, he changed his mind and turned back home. Upon returning, he filled the bathtub with water and tragically drowned his daughters. After their deaths, he placed their bodies in a plastic container. As Hurricane Orion approached Florida in early September, a state of emergency was declared, prompting many people to seek shelter. Michael took advantage of the chaos to transport 5 bodies, including his wife and children. He loaded them into his truck and headed north to stay with Sarah. During his stay, Sarah noticed that Michael never contacted KCI or inquired about the children, which made her uneasy. However, she chose not to ask questions due to her awareness of the marital issues. After the hurricane passed, Michael's neighbors reported a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the trailer to the property owner. The owner checked the trailer, first looking through the windows and then entering it. Although the furniture and personal belongings were still there, the smell was overwhelming, but nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. KCI's mother grew desperate as she tried to make sense of her daughter's disappearance. She suspected Michael might be in trouble with the law and hiding, which could explain why her daughter was also in hiding for her own safety. Rather than waiting, KCI's mother contacted the sheriff's office and requested a welfare check at Michael's house. When officers arrived for the welfare check, they found the house empty but appeared to have been recently cleaned. However, a strong smell of decomposition lingered, contradicting the presence of cleaning supplies near the entrance. Before the officers could investigate further, the property owner arrived and asked them to leave. Meanwhile, with the bodies still in his vehicle, Michael drove out of state into Georgia. He stopped near a wooded area and disposed of the bodies of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayana. As he continued driving and checked his GPS, Michael lost control of the vehicle and crashed. Although Michael escaped without injury, the vehicle was severely damaged. The police quickly arrived at the scene of the accident and were immediately hit with the strong, terrible odor coming from the wrecked truck. They find a suitcase in Michael's truck, and when they open it, they discovered KCI's gruesome body. Michael broke down and confessed to his heinous crimes on the roadside. He also revealed the location of the children, leading to his immediate arrest. KCI's family was devastated by the news, feeling as though their world had shattered. In shock and grief, they still do not understand why Michael could have so brutally murdered his wife and children. Sarah, in particular, felt an intense hatred towards Michael, a sentiment she had never experienced before. With a search warrant and new evidence in hand, investigators went back to KCI's house. Upon entering, they were met with a strong, unpleasant odor and a noticeable reddish stain on the carpet. The agents began collecting evidence from the scene, while the autopsies were being performed to gather more information about the tragic incident. Forensic results showed that Cameron sustained a fractured jaw with no other visible signs of trauma. But a towel was in his mouth. Preston was found with a noose around his neck. Mercalli and Ayana were found in a small plastic bag together, which also contained a baby bottle with Ayana's name on it and a pair of pink sandals. The cause of death for Mercalli and Ayana was determined to be drowning. KCI's autopsy results showed a severe blunt force injury to the front of her skull and face, but no other signs of trauma were found on her body. When questioned by authorities, Michael remained calm and provided precise and honest answers. Michael even thanked the police officers who arrested him and said he felt he had no other choice. Michael provided a clear and chronological account of incident from the fight with KCI to his subsequent arrest. When asked about his motives, Michael said that his actions stemmed from the harsh life circumstances he endured, which led him to believe that his decision was the only possible solution. The tragedy profoundly affected everyone involved, but it was particularly shattering for Sarah. She found it extremely difficult to accept that her children had been exposed to and had lived with someone like Michael. As a result, Sarah struggled with mental health issues after learning the truth. Michael was subsequently charged with second-degree murder for KCI's death and 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder for the deaths of the children. Michael pleaded guilty to the charges, bypassing a trial and moving directly to the sentencing phase. A 12-person jury then had to decide between 2 sentences, life imprisonment or the death penalty. The defense strategy focused on Michael's difficult childhood and mental health issues, highlighting various psychological disorders that may justify a reduced sentence. However, state prosecutors argued that the extreme brutality of the case worthy a death penalty. In January 2023, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, as required by state law. After a brief 99-minute hearing, the judge formally sentenced Michael to death. He also received a separate sentence of life imprisonment without parole for the murder of KCI. Michael's lawyer quickly filed an appeal following the sentencing. However, on April 28, 2023, the judge rejected the appeal and confirmed the original sentence. Prosecutors were pleased that justice had been achieved for KCI's family. Michael is still in prison, awaiting his scheduled execution. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Adam Strong. Adam Strong was born in 1972 in Cornwall, a small town in Stormont County, Ontario. Little is known about his family and early life. He remained single and childless, working as a gas station attendant and a security guard on film sets. Those who knew him described Adam as quirky and eccentric, often coming across as superior to others. He enjoyed debating and arguing to prove his point, but was not typically confrontational. A review of his social media profiles revealed Adam's interest in BDSM practices, which he openly discussed and shared photos and videos about. Although he never had a long-term partner, some former partners accused him of being a sadist who subjected them to physical and emotional abuse, leading to the end of their relationships. Adam also had a peculiar hobby of writing reviews of adult films and magazines. It appeared that watching such content was a significant part of his free time. Despite his unusual interests, Adam presented himself as a calm and composed individual, showing no outward signs of a troubled or criminal nature. The story took an unexpected turn 4 months later when at the end of December, when David Wood's family moved into the house at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa, they were immediately struck by a strange and unpleasant smell. Their downstairs neighbor, Adam Strong, a 45-year-old single man who lived in the other half of the house, reassured them that it was just a minor plumbing issue that he would fix within a few days. Although Adam was friendly and polite in his communication, there was something unsettling about him that put the Wood family on edge. When David's wife tried to welcome him with some homemade cookies, Adam wouldn't even let her into his apartment. Instead, he stepped out into the hallway, closing his door behind him. In that brief moment, David's wife caught a glimpse of Adam's living space, which was in disarray, and the smell inside was overpowering and foul. Adam borrowed cookies from his new neighbor and quickly left. Later, when they met in the yard, he apologized for not inviting her in, explaining that his apartment was a mess due to upcoming renovations. Despite his efforts to be polite, he seemed nervous. As the Wood family settled into their new home, they tried to ignore a persistent smell. However, on December 29th, they called a plumber to fix a sewer blockage, which had intensified the stench. The problem seemed minor, but what the workers found in the pipes shocked even experienced forensic experts. Plumber Sean Funn and his partner began to clear the blockage in the Woods' apartment. Although they were accustomed to unpleasant odors, they were surprised by the terrible smell inside. They soon realized they needed to investigate further and descended to the apartment below, which belonged to a man named Adam. Adam reluctantly let the workers in, apologizing for the mess. The smell was even worse in his apartment, and when the plumbers reached the source of the blockage, the stench became unbearable. Sean, a seasoned plumber, had never encountered anything as foul-smelling as this in his years of practice. However, an even more disturbing discovery awaited him and his team when they decided to clear the pipe. Adam, already on edge, became increasingly agitated, refusing to step away and bombarding the workers with questions about their methods and estimated time of completion. He later claimed he was simply curious, having never witnessed this process before. The specialists tried to brush off his behavior, but their efforts were soon overshadowed by the gruesome discovery of over 10 kilograms of flesh, hair, and bone fragments in the pipes. Sean was horrified to find disfigured and partially decomposed human fingers among the debris. Adam feigned surprise, claiming he had never seen anything so disgusting, and then asked the plumbers if they had any idea how this could have ended up in the sewer pipe. Sean decided to call the police immediately to report the disturbing discovery. He informed them that he had likely found human remains and provided the address. He made sure Adam didn't touch or disturb anything, preserving the evidence. When the officers arrived, they quickly confirmed that Sean's suspicions were correct. Human flesh had been extracted from the pipes. The police then spoke with the Adam. He admitted that a woman's body had been stuck in the pipe. He even revealed that other body parts were stored in his refrigerator's freezer. Upon investigation, the police found a severed head and limb fragments packed in plastic bags, which were too large. The house was extremely filthy and cluttered, with a kitchen filled with dirty dishes and rotting food, as well as trash covering the floor. Empty pizza boxes were scattered around, and numerous magazines of an explicit and masochistic nature were present among the mess. Various adult toys, gags, whips, handcuffs, and restraint devices were also discovered. Adam Strong was arrested at the scene and taken to the police station for questioning. His arrest puzzled the authorities, as he had no prior run-ins with the law and was not a person of interest to the police. Mr. Adam had resided at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa for over 10 years, dating back to 2007, without incident or complaints from neighbors. The House of Horrors at 19 Macmillan Drive, Adam's residence, was secured and guarded as a crime scene. An initial inspection revealed a complex and time-consuming process lay ahead, with investigators expecting to uncover more shocking evidence. The discovery of a head in the refrigerator was just the beginning. Evidence found at the scene led law enforcement to suspect a connection to Rory Hash, whose torso had been recovered from a body of water 4 months earlier. A tattoo on the neck and subsequent DNA analysis confirmed that the discovered remains belonged to Rory. Further investigation revealed blood-stained clothing and shoes belonging to she, hidden among trash in various rooms of the house. The bedroom was particularly disturbing, with blood traces found on the bed, walls, furniture, and ceiling. These bloodstains were later confirmed to belong to a missing schoolgirl. A dissection table was also found in the kitchen, suggesting it was used to dismember and gut the victim. The entire scene was gruesome, with blood, skin particles, hair, and bone fragments scattered everywhere, causing nausea in those who witnessed it. The bathroom was extremely dirty and unsanitary, with signs of a violent crime visible everywhere, including dirt, blood, and broken fixtures. The toilet was dismantled and lay in a corner, surrounded by garbage. It appeared that the perpetrator, Adam, had attempted to dispose of a body by cutting it into pieces and flushing them down the sewer. However, he encountered a blockage and, when his attempt to fix it failed, left the scene in disarray. Inside the house, a large number of sharp objects were discovered, which likely had been used to dismember the victim. Some of the objects, including knives, still had blood on them. Further analysis of the evidence, including DNA samples, revealed that Adam had semen on fragments of the victim's body, which had been found in the refrigerator. Rory Hash was born on July 9, 1999, in Oshawa, Ontario, to Shannon Dion, a single mother. Rory's father was not present in her life, having left before her birth. Despite this, Rory grew up in a loving and supportive family environment provided by her mother and maternal grandmother. Rory's family had an unconventional background, with her maternal grandfather founding and leading the motorcycle club Satan's Choice. He was also a skilled boxer with connections to organized crime. Additionally, Rory's uncle was a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club and led a troubled life, frequently encountering legal issues. However, this did not affect Rory's childhood, which was remarkably peaceful and carefree. Rory excelled academically and had a passion for dance, winning awards in competitions. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, responsible, and compassionate. At the age of 13, Rory earned top honors as a cadet in her local army unit, showcasing her exceptional qualities from a young age. At 15, Rory's life took a downward turn. A friend introduced her to drugs, and she quickly became addicted. She started spending time with the wrong crowd, neglected her schoolwork, and eventually stopped attending school altogether. For about a year, her family tried to help her overcome her addiction by sending her to various treatment centers, but she relapsed each time. At 17, Rory ran away from home and began working in the sex trade to support her habit. Rory eventually sought help from a specialized service for teenagers struggling with addiction. With their support, she was able to enter mandatory treatment and turn her life around. She found a job at a local shop, studied remotely to earn her high school diploma, and even started thinking about attending college. Rory also started a serious relationship with a boy named Anthony, and they decided to move in together in the spring of 2017. When Rory discovered she was pregnant, she was nearly 18 and felt ready to take on the responsibility of motherhood. Her mother supported her decision, but was unaware that Rory had started using illicit substances again. In mid-August, Rory met with Crane at a shopping center. Crane had been keeping an eye on her for 18 months to ensure she didn't fall back into her old habits. During their meeting, Rory revealed that she had started using drugs again and had lost her job a month prior. She also admitted to exchanging intimate favors for money or drugs. Crane was deeply concerned and promised to help. He asked Rory to wait while he made a call to arrange for her to be hospitalized. However, when he returned, Rory was gone. The next day, Rory's mother and uncle took her to the hospital after finding her in a state of incoherence due to substance use. They left her in the emergency room queue for about an hour, but when they returned, Rory was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed that she had simply gotten up and walked out of the hospital. Her family reported her missing the following day, but despite a thorough search and widespread social media attention, Rory was never seen again. Rory's exact circumstances of arrival at Adam's house are unknown, but it is probable that she went there seeking drugs in exchange for sex. The investigation started when Adam informed the police about the location of Rory's remaining body parts. Initially, investigators anticipated Adam would admit to the crime, but when he was taken to the station, he became uncooperative, refused to answer questions, and denied any involvement in Rory's death, all while remaining calm. The only charge filed against Adam was desecration of a body, as there was not enough direct evidence to link him to the murder. Despite his lawyer's efforts, Adam was not granted bail and stayed in jail until his trial. Investigators attempted to get Adam to reveal more information by provoking an emotional response, but he remained cautious and avoided discussing Rory's visit to his house and his potential involvement in her death. However, Adam freely talked about his interest in bladed weapons and his large collection of knives. A search of Adam's house uncovered a significant piece of evidence, a dirty hunting knife hidden in a closet with dried skin fragments that appeared to be human. DNA testing revealed that the samples on the knife did not match Rory's, but belonged to someone else. It took several months to identify the person, but by July 2017, investigators had confirmed that the DNA on the knife belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, she who had gone missing about 10 years earlier. Candace shared many similarities with Rory Hash. Both struggled with addiction and had run-ins with the law. They came from troubled families and often ran away from home, sometimes disappearing for months at a time. To survive, they would often exchange sex for food and other necessities. Candace was born in 1989 and was 18 when she disappeared. Her family did not realize she was missing until almost 2 years later, by which time any potential leads had gone cold. Many people believed that Candace's lifestyle and social circle meant she could have gone anywhere. For 10 years, her parents thought she might have run away and would eventually return home. However, news from law enforcement in 2018 destroyed their hope of ever seeing their daughter alive again. A striking feature of the case was the physical resemblance between Candace and another victim, who was the same age. The police believed they had caught a serial offender. The suspect, Adam, also confessed to harming Candace. However, Adam refused to provide information about Rory unless the police agreed to improve his prison conditions. He wanted a private cell, a large TV, internet, and his favorite meals. Although law enforcement was outraged by Adam's demands, they agreed in order to gain valuable information. Adam began by sharing his troubled childhood, revealing that he was abused by his stepfather from age 5 and started harming animals at age 7, deriving physical pleasure from these acts. He also discussed his unusual intimate preferences and expressed frustration at not finding a partner who shared these interests. When discussing Rory, Adam described in detail how he had dismembered her, seemingly taking pleasure in the act, but later regretted his plumbing had failed him. However, when questioned by police, Adam denied responsibility for her death, claiming she had died from an overdose and he had only disposed of the body. When asked about Candace, a case from 10 years prior, Adam was caught off guard and attempted to learn how the police had discovered the connection. Upon hearing about the human remains found on an old knife, Adam became subdued and regretted not taking better precautions to avoid detection. He admitted to meeting Candace but denied killing her. Despite a lack of evidence to support his claims, Adam unintentionally incriminated himself during the investigation. In an attempt to gain sympathy, he shared his account of events. However, when informed that the victim, Rory, was pregnant at the time of her death, Adam strongly denied this fact. The police noted that the pregnancy was in its early stages, and therefore not visibly apparent. Adam claimed that he would have noticed if she was pregnant, sparking a realization among the investigators that he would stop at nothing to argue his point. To uncover more information, the police told Adam that Rory was pregnant, which led him to attempt to prove the contrary. In his eagerness to refute this, he shared graphic details about how he had personally examined her body and held her reproductive organs in his hands. Adam's account was detailed and included his physical sensations, describing the flesh as soft and warm. At one point, he even mentioned feeling a pulse. These statements raised suspicions that Rory may have still been alive at the time. Unfortunately for Adam, his entire narrative was captured on camera, and his incriminating statements were presented as evidence in court. When confronted about his earlier statements, Adam tried to retract his previous admissions, but it was too late. The defendant, Adam Strong, refused to reveal what he had done with Candace's body, and despite extensive searches, her remains were never found. Investigators also failed to identify any other potential victims. During one of the final interrogations, Strong showed no remorse, saying, "I don't know if it matters, but I'd like to extend my condolences to her parents." During the trial, Strong's lawyers argued that he was mentally ill and therefore not responsible for his actions, claiming he needed medical treatment rather than punishment. However, the court had to decide whether he was sane and accountable for his crimes or if he should be committed to a psychiatric facility instead of serving time in prison. A psychiatric evaluation found that although Strong had certain mental health disorders, he was aware of his actions and could be held legally responsible. Strong's trial began in September 2020, 3 years after Rory's death and 12 years after Candace disappeared. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and desecration of Rory's remains. Although he never admitted guilt, the evidence found in his home and his statements during interrogations confirmed his involvement in these horrific crimes. 4 of Adam's former partners testified against him, describing his cruel and violent behavior. The prosecution presented evidence that Adam had lured 2 women to his home with promises of money in exchange for intimate services that catered to his specific preferences. Once they were in his home, he would immobilize and torment them for an extended period. In the case of Rory, he likely killed her during the ordeal because he feared she would report him to the police. On September 4th, a signal from Adam's phone was detected near the city harbor, where he had discarded Rory's torso, hoping the current would carry it away. In April 2021, Adam Strong was found guilty of murdering Candace Fitzpatrick and Rory Hash, as well as desecrating Rory's remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Adam showed little remorse, stating that his prison cell was an improvement over his previous living conditions. 6 months after his sentencing, Adam unexpectedly revealed the location of Candace's remains. Following his directions, the police conducted a months-long search that ultimately led to the discovery of human bones. DNA testing confirmed the skeleton's identity as young Candace Fitzpatrick, and this was officially announced. Investigators now strongly suspect that there may be at least one more female victim in the Adam case. During Adam's initial interrogation, his personal belongings were seized, including a chain with 3 rings. Adam asked for the chain's return, explaining that the rings held sentimental value and he didn't want to lose them. Relatives of Rory and Candace later identified 2 of the rings as belonging to their daughters, but the origin of the 3rd ring remains unknown. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. Lindsay Wilson was a kind and loving young woman. Lindsay had a deep-seated need for connection and love. Her major misstep was that she misjudged her partner and invested herself in their toxic relationship. Lindsay was 17 when she found out she was pregnant. Growing up in a loving and supportive family, she had never expected to become a mother so young. Although she was emotionally mature, what made it even more difficult was that her boyfriend, whom she had been dating since she was 13, abandoned her as soon as he learned he was going to be a father. His sudden departure left Lindsay feeling both upset and scared. Lindsay was all too familiar with the physical and financial strains of motherhood. Her family, the Wilsons, were loving and close-knit, but they had often struggled to make ends meet. Despite their financial challenges, Lindsay's parents had always worked hard to provide for their children. When Lindsay met Mitchell, 5 months into her pregnancy, she felt like she had been given a rare gift. Mitchell, who was 20 years old at the time, was attentive, caring, and gentle. What impressed Lindsay most was that her pregnancy didn't deter him. Instead, he was eager to be involved and supportive. Mitchell told Lindsay that he had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, raising her child as his own. To show his commitment, Mitchell began working overtime to ensure that Lindsay and their unborn child would not have to worry about anything. 20-year-old Mitchell was a true gentleman. He was attentive and loving to Lindsay, despite her delicate condition. In fact, Mitchell had fallen deeply in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, including raising her child as his own. At the time, Mitchell was earning a good income. However, when they announced their decision to get married, their parents were shocked. They felt that their 5-week relationship was too short to withstand the challenges and circumstances that came with marriage. Despite their concerns, Lindsay's relatives noticed a positive change in her since being with Mitchell. She had regained her cheerfulness and good health. However, some of them found Mitchell's behavior to be a bit insincere. Nevertheless, no one interfered with their decision to get married, and instead chose to keep their doubts to themselves. The wedding took place in August 1995, surrounded by a small, intimate group of family and friends, mostly from the bride's side. The groom's side was noticeably underrepresented, with only his parents, a brother, and 2 friends in attendance. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, Lindsay's relatives couldn't shake off their uneasy feelings about the union. However, Lindsay herself was over the moon, believing she had found her perfect match. As the evening wore on, their happiness was short-lived. A disagreement erupted, and the newlyweds' argument played out in front of their guests. The reason for Mitchell's outburst seemed trivial, and his reaction was disproportionately intense. The situation escalated, with Mitchell grasping Lindsay's hand and violently shaking her, leaving everyone in attendance stunned and uncomfortable. Mitchell appeared agitated and threatening, causing concern. When he calmed down, he apologized to everyone and made light of the situation, attributing his behavior to holiday stress. Although Lindsay didn't think much of the incident at the time and soon forgot about it, it was actually one of the warning signs of their toxic relationship. After getting married, Mitchell and Lindsay moved into an apartment in Southport, away from their parents. They started their life together and soon welcomed a baby girl named Robin. However, Lindsay soon discovered that her husband had a volatile temper, which cast a shadow over the joy of their new family. Mitchell's moods were unpredictable. One moment he was happy and joking, and the next, he would become aggressive and unreasonable. She thought she was maintaining a delicate balance at home, but in reality, she was giving in to his control. He dictates her every move and gets angry if she misses a phone call or doesn't pick up. Their arguments often ended with Mitchell begging for forgiveness and declaring his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had been restored, but their cycle of arguments became more and more intense. Lindsay struggled to recognize who she once loved. She frequently shared her concerns with her relatives, who urged her to leave the relationship and end her suffering. However, Lindsay found it difficult to acknowledge her mistake and admit defeat. Lindsay's relatives noticed that she often dwelled on memories of the past. Whenever her husband promised to change and return to his gentle and caring ways, Lindsay wanted to believe him and waited for him to fulfill his promises. Meanwhile, Mitchell's controlling behavior intensified. He restricted Lindsay's freedom, forbidding her from going out alone in the evenings and eventually requiring her to be accompanied by him at all times. Despite his possessiveness, Mitchell was seen with other women, sparking Lindsay's suspicions of infidelity. Lindsay confided in her older sister about her concerns, sharing an incident where a woman visited their home, unaware that Mitchell was married. This revelation led to another argument, which escalated into physical violence. Physical abuse gradually became a part of Lindsay's life. To control her and protect his reputation, Mitchell started limiting her interactions with others. He began by restricting her contact with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and eventually with her family. Lindsay, unhappy and fearful of being caught and punished, tried to secretly maintain contact with her loved ones. Despite the problems in their relationship, Lindsay stayed with Mitchell. One reason was the comfortable life he provided. He had a good income, supported her and their child, and paid the bills, leaving her without any financial worries. Lindsay's life changed dramatically when she found herself pregnant again. Although her husband, Mitchell, was a good father to her daughter from a previous relationship, she felt that having another child would be unwise in their current circumstances. She decided to have an abortion. When Mitchell found out about her decision, he became furious and verbally and physically abused her. Lindsay packed her belongings and took her daughter to her parents' home. Her family was relieved to see her. At first, Lindsay was happy to be apart from her husband, Mitchell. But over time, she started to miss him. Mitchell, eager to win her back, would call her constantly, begging her to return. Despite initial reservations, Lindsay was eventually won over by Mitchell's claims that he had changed. Everything seems to be back to normal, they are even looking forward to another child. However, their happiness was short-lived. After 6 months, Mitchell's violent temper flared up again. Although he didn't harm Lindsay, who was pregnant at the time, he unleashed his fury on their apartment. He smashed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and damaged the walls. He even threw their television out the window and vandalized their car. The landlord, fed up with the destruction, demanded that they pay for the damages and move out. The family's financial situation became even more dire. As a result, they was forced to take out a significant loan and downsize to a smaller, more modest apartment. In October 1997, Lindsay gave birth to their son, Jack. Mitchell was overjoyed at the arrival of his child. However, the relationship between the spouses continued to deteriorate over time. Mitchell often left home for extended periods, sometimes for just a few days, sometimes for an entire week, frequently citing trivial or made-up reasons. Although Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior, she eventually reached her breaking point and filed for divorce, returning to her parents' home when Mitchell abandoned her once again. Lindsay realized she couldn't handle the separation from Mitchell on her own, so she reached out to a local charity that supports women in crisis. The charity helped her find affordable housing in a different city, allowing her to start fresh. However, she was worried that Mitchell would find out her new contact information, so she took steps to protect herself. When Mitchell began making threats, she took it a step further and got a restraining order from the police. With the help of a therapist, Lindsay started rebuilding her life. She kept a journal to document her experiences, intending to use it as a warning for her children in the future, so they wouldn't make the same mistakes she did. The journal entries supported what her relatives had said about the problems within the family. Unfortunately, despite her efforts to stay hidden, Mitchell eventually discovered her phone number and began calling her constantly, demanding to see their son. Lindsay, now free, soon felt lonely and couldn't resist her ex's persistence. They started talking and seeing each other again, eventually moving back in together. Ashamed of her weakness, Lindsay kept this a secret, but it eventually came out. Her relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by her reunion with he they considered a tyrant, and they couldn't understand why she had taken him back. Her relatives continued to dislike Mitchell and cut off most communication with him. Despite their efforts to help her, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. As a result, her loved ones eventually gave up trying to save her, accepting the situation and distancing themselves. This time, however, Lindsay's decision would prove to have devastating consequences. After Lindsay disclosed her situation, a social worker began monitoring the young family. However, the social worker reported that she had been unable to contact Lindsay for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband, Mitchell, would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. Despite the social worker's repeated requests to speak directly with Lindsay, Mitchell would make excuses and prevent her from doing so. The social worker would leave her contact information, but Lindsay never returned her calls. The social worker became concerned for Lindsay's safety and requested a welfare check. When law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, they too were unable to speak with Lindsay. Mitchell claimed that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but he did not consider her missing. Mitchell said that Lindsay participated in a party with a friend on Christmas Eve, returning home early in the morning somewhat intoxicated. This led to an argument with Mitchell. Following the argument, Lindsay packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. Mitchell claimed Lindsay had left him for another man and no longer wanted to have any contact with him. Mitchell's subsequent media appearances sparked widespread attention. He presented himself as a worried and abandoned husband, pleading for Lindsay to return. However, during these interviews, he also shared intimate details about their marriage, occasionally speaking negatively about his wife. Mitchell believes that Lindsay's actions stemmed from a desire for a lavish lifestyle. He said to have seen her driving an expensive car, which he thought was proof that she had left their children for a wealthy man. Despite her public image, Mitchell was enjoying the freedom of a single life. The search for Lindsay began with conversations with her relatives. During these conversations, it was learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th. At that time, she appeared to be in high spirits and looking well, with her behavior being normal. During their investigation, detectives were surprised that no one had expressed concern about the young wife's whereabouts for 2 months. However, they soon discovered a plausible explanation. Mitchell had a history of limiting his wife's interactions with others, even close relatives. In the past, her family had difficulty staying in touch with her due to Mitchell's controlling behavior, which made it more believable that Lindsay had intentionally kept a low profile for an extended period. The news of Lindsay's disappearance alarmed everyone, despite the initial assumption that she was not the type to be concerned about. She was known for her modest lifestyle and never drank. Additionally, her husband had restricted her from having any contact with the outside world, including friends and acquaintances. Several inconsistencies in Mitchell's statement to the police raised suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would willingly let his wife leave, and that Lindsay would not abandon her children to a controlling husband. To clarify the situation, the police conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing all of Lindsay's acquaintances and searching for anyone who may have seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned their neighbors and obtained surveillance footage from the residential complex and surrounding areas. Lindsay's disappearance was not immediately noticed, and by the time it was. However, investigators later discovered that she was last seen in person on December 15th at the local post office, where she sent several letters and postcards. Her older sister confirmed that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. During their brief conversation over tea, Lindsay handed her sister a note and asked her to read it later. Unfortunately, the sister forgot about the note in her purse and was unable to find it later, leaving its contents a mystery. As the months passed, investigators grew increasingly suspicious that she was no longer alive, given her prolonged absence and lack of contact. Although they couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient evidence, their suspicions about him intensified as they learned more about their history and relationship. Lindsay's parents and detectives suspected Mitchell was involved in her disappearance, but lacked concrete evidence. Searches at their home and nearby turned up nothing. In a televised interview, Mitchell denied any wrongdoing, even claiming Lindsay's family would eventually apologize for suspecting him. Just before the holidays, Mitchell sent a postcard and hair dye to the lead investigator. The postcard's sarcastic message mocked the detective, implying he needed confidence and to cover his gray hair. This gesture showcased Mitchell's arrogance, despite portraying himself as a victim in the media. The investigation team held an interview to clarify some aspects of the case, but they didn't reveal all the details. They suggested that Mitchell Key, a well-known family man, was not what he seemed to be. In 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal when it was discovered that he had been forging his wife's signature to claim social benefits. Although this revelation indirectly supported the theory that he was involved in Lindsay's disappearance, the investigators had trouble making progress due to Mitchell's popularity. Many people defended him, arguing that as a single father, he needed financial assistance. Despite this, the detectives were able to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was found guilty and sentenced to a month of community service. Mitchell's situation took a turn for the worse. The forged signature of his missing wife raised more than a few eyebrows, and the public's outrage grew. As the criticism mounted, Mitchell's composure began to fray, and he lashed out at the media for invading his personal life. In a groundbreaking development, a visitor to an amusement park on June 1, 2000, stumbled upon a disturbing discovery that rekindled the Lindsay disappearance case. Their dog's strange behavior near the roller coaster led to the discovery of human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Lindsay, revealing she had been the victim of a violent crime. This breakthrough shifted the investigation's focus to finding the person responsible. On June 7, Mitchell was questioned by detectives for over 36 hours, during which time he eventually cracked under the pressure and confessed to murdering and dismembering his wife. According to his testimony, Lindsay had asked for a divorce on December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister. This request enraged Mitchell, causing him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her body in their bedroom, taking steps to conceal the smell. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, Mitchell turned to his brother Elliot, a butcher, for assistance. Although Elliot was initially hesitant, Mitchell eventually convinced him to help. While their children played in the next room, the brothers dismembered Lindsay's body and later scattered her remains throughout the city. The murderer showed no remorse or empathy during his confession. Instead, he seemed to take pride in his actions, saying that without his confession, they would never have been able to prove his guilt. He then led the authorities to the locations where he had hidden the victim's body parts. Unfortunately, her head and one hand were never found. The forensic examination confirmed that all of those of Lindsay, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Mitchell brothers took place in January 2001 and was a relatively straightforward process. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist observed that Mitchell displayed classic characteristics of a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. Elliot, Mitchell's brother, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in covering up the crime. Lindsay's children were taken care of by her grandparents, who gave them their last name. 3 months after the sentence, the Wilson family faced another tragedy when one of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the loss, took his own life in the family's attic. In his goodbye note, he expressed his desire to reunite with Lindsay, saying he saw no point in living in a world he considered cruel. As of 2017, Mitchell Key, Lindsay's murderer, became eligible for parole, but as of January 2023, his parole requests have been denied 3 times. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rachel O'Reilly. Rachel O'Reilly was born in 1974 in County Dublin, Ireland. Her biological parents are unknown, but she was adopted at a young age by Rose and Jim Calley, who raised her along with their 4 other adopted children. Rachel was a responsible and driven child. She excelled in school, played sports, helped with household chores, and never caused any trouble. As she grew up, she became a sociable, open, and exceptionally kind person. She got along with everyone and avoided conflict whenever possible. As a teenager, Rachel was a skilled softball player, participating in numerous competitions and setting local records. Her closest relationship was with her adoptive mother, Rose, with whom she shared all her secrets and stayed in close touch even after she got married and had children of her own. Rachel decided to pursue a degree in marketing from a local university after completing high school. She also landed a job as a salesperson at a city department store and continued to play sports for a local team in her free time. Joe O'Reilly, born in 1972 in County Dublin, Joe grew up in a simple family as the second child of his parents, with an older sister. His parents instilled in him the value of hard work and self-reliance, not spoiling him or his sister. Joe was a tall and athletic boy who enjoyed playing softball. After high school, he chose to study advertising through correspondence and took a job as a manager at a department store. A few months later, Rachel would start working at the same store. Joe was 19 years old when he first met Rachel, who was just 17. He was immediately drawn to her and introduced himself, but despite being charmed by her bright smile and blonde hair, she refused to go on a date with him. Undeterred, Joe began to try to win her over, showering her with compliments and small gifts, such as flowers and chocolates, which he would leave at her workstation in the morning. However, no matter how hard he tried, Rachel remained unimpressed. The entire department store staff was entertained by Joe's attempts to get Rachel's attention, and it even became a running joke. Despite initial challenges, Joe persevered. He made an effort to read Rachel's favorite book, hoping to find common ground for conversation. However, it wasn't until he discovered her passion for softball that he made significant progress. Joe attended one of her games, joined in during practice, and showcased his skills on the field. As a result, the team won, and Rachel was finally impressed by his determination and athletic abilities. She agreed to go on a date with him, and their relationship began to blossom. As they spent more time together, Joe went to great lengths to prove his commitment and affection. He planned a surprise trip to Paris, a city he knew Rachel would love. In a romantic gesture, he proposed to her at the top of the Eiffel Tower. Rachel was overwhelmed by the surprise and happily accepted his proposal. She thought she had found her perfect match, a true prince who would make her happy for the rest of her life. A few years after their wedding, they had 2 sons. They moved to a peaceful and scenic area in Scotland, where they bought a spacious and cozy home, ideal for raising their children. After the birth of their first son, Rachel left her job to focus on taking care of her family. 2 years later, their second son was born, and Rachel dedicated herself to raising their children. Meanwhile, Joe secured a job at an advertising agency, specializing in outdoor advertising, which proved to be a successful career move for him. Those who knew Joe personally described him as a confident, driven, and charming individual. At work, he demonstrated his responsibility, expertise, and attention to detail. As they grew older and started attending kindergarten, Rachel began working as a distributor for a popular cosmetics company and selling household goods to earn extra income. This job allowed her to interact more with her neighbors. who praised her as a wonderful mother and a kind, open person. Meanwhile, Joe became increasingly absent from home, only returning to sleep, shower, and change clothes. He attributed his absence to his demanding work schedule and an upcoming promotion he was eagerly anticipating. Rachel supported Joe as best she could, but as time passed, they started to drift apart, and their family relationships began to deteriorate significantly. A disturbing incident occurred in the summer of 2004 when an anonymous person sent a letter to Child Protective Services, falsely accusing Rachel of being a bad mother who mistreated her sons. In response, a special commission visited their home to investigate the allegations. Although the investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing, and relatives and neighbors described Rachel as a loving and caring mother, the malicious letter damaged her reputation. On the morning of Monday, October 4, 2004, the O'Reilly household began as usual. Joe, the father, left for work at dawn while his wife, Rachel, and their sons were still asleep. Throughout the day, Joe tried to contact Rachel by texting and calling her, but she didn't respond. He then called their home phone, but the answering machine picked up, and Joe left a worried message, asking Rachel to call him back as soon as possible. Later that afternoon, Joe received a call from the kindergarten teacher, informing him that Rachel had not arrived to pick up their sons, which was unusual. Joe then called his mother-in-law, Rose, to ask if she knew Rachel's whereabouts. When Rose said she didn't know, Joe asked her to check on their house and see if everything was okay. Meanwhile, Joe went to the kindergarten to pick up the children. When Rose arrived at the house, she found Rachel's car in the yard, indicating that Rachel was home. However, the house was dark and quiet, and Rose's calls went unanswered. As Rose entered the house, she was immediately struck by the scene of chaos before her. Cabinets and drawers were open, with their contents scattered all over the floor, giving the appearance of a robbery. Upon entering the bedroom, Rose's was met with a horrific sight. Rachel lay lifeless on the floor, surrounded by a massive pool of her own blood. The walls, furniture, and even the ceiling were splattered with blood, and Rachel's tangled, bloody hair partially concealed her skull. In some places, the bare bones of her skull were visible. Rose rushed to her daughter, hoping against hope that she was still alive and could be saved. But when she touched Rachel's arm, she felt it was cold and stiff. It was clear that Rachel had been dead for hours, and there was nothing that could be done to help her. Overcome with grief and unable to collect her thoughts, Rose began screaming and calling for help. She then rushed to the phone to dial the police. Her screams alerted the neighbors, one of whom was a doctor. The doctor was the first to examine the body and confirm that Rachel was beyond help. When Joe arrived at the house, he was met with a crowd of people who had already gathered there. Upon learning of his wife's death, he was overcome with grief, screaming and running inside the house, exclaiming that he didn't believe the news. In the bedroom, he became hysterical beside his wife's body, crying and vowing to kill the person responsible for her murder. According to the police officers who responded to the scene, the crime was one of the most brutal they had ever encountered. The victim, Rachel, had been beaten to death with a heavy blunt object with incredible force. It appeared that she had been attacked from behind, as she showed no signs of having tried to resist or fight back. At first, the scene resembled a robbery, but the investigators' instincts suggested that the brutality of the attack indicated a personal motive or intense dislike. However, it was unclear who would have wanted to harm the Rachel, who was a mother of two. The detectives began by interviewing Rachel's family members and neighbors, who all confirmed that she was a friendly person with no known enemies or conflicts. None of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious on the day of the murder. Joe provided an alibi, stating that he was at the bus depot on the other side of town for work, which could be corroborated by a coworker. The scene looked like a robbery, but nothing valuable was taken. A €1,000 note was left untouched on the bedside table, and another stash of money was found in a kitchen cupboard, also untouched. A jewelry box on the dressing table was disturbed, but only a pair of chains and earrings were missing, found separately in a drawer. The homeowner reported that a digital camera, silverware, and one of his dumbbells, likely the murder weapon, were missing. The investigation found the situation suspicious. The house was in disarray, and Rachel was brutally murdered, yet only a few items were taken. Joe, answering police questions, was visibly shaken, crying, and feverish. However, one investigator believed that Joe's behavior seemed more like nervous excitement than grief or shock. When asked if his wife might have had an affair, Joe's demeanor changed, and he confidently denied it. He then added that he had not cheated on his wife, but this statement seemed unconvincing. A bag containing stolen items from the house was discovered in the bushes, 2 miles from the crime scene. The bag held a camera, silverware, and a few pieces of jewelry, all of which were on the list of stolen items compiled by Joe. This new evidence led investigators to rule out the possibility of a robbery and reclassify the case as a premeditated murder. As a result, Joe, who had been trying to appear grief-stricken, became the prime suspect. His attempts to convey pain and sorrow seemed insincere, raising suspicions about his involvement in the crime. Joe didn't have an alibi to present, so the detectives had to investigate the details of his day to piece together what happened. According to Joe, he started the morning by stopping at the gym, a routine he followed regularly. The surveillance cameras in the gym's parking lot and inside the gym confirmed his presence. After his gym visit, Joe drove to the office and then headed to a remote bus station in the city to check on the placement of advertisements on buses. A colleague corroborated Joe's account, recalling a phone conversation they had around that time. The investigators then visited Joe's workplace to inspect his computer. This led to a significant discovery. Joe's email contained some suspicious messages that he had partially deleted. Specialists were able to recover the deleted emails, and the police became convinced they were on the right track. Most of the recovered emails were exchanges with Joe's friend and sister, in which he frequently complained about his wife, Rachel, using derogatory language and profanity. Joe's wife had not been attractive to him for a long time, and in fact, he felt a strong sense of disgust towards her. Meanwhile, investigators discovered a suspicious correspondence between Joe and a female colleague named Nikki Pell. Their communication suggested that they were more than just friends and warranted further questioning. Nikki Pell worked at the same advertising company as Joe and was 10 years his senior. Despite their age difference, they had begun an affair. It was unclear when exactly their workplace romance started, but it was evident that Joe spent a significant amount of time with Nikki, often staying late into the evenings and even nights. Joe's wife was unaware of this and was misled into believing that he was busy with work. What was even more alarming was the content of Joe's messages to Nikki, in which he promised that they would soon be together, referring to her as a potential stepmother to his children with his wife, Rachel. Such messages raised suspicions, especially considering that in the event of a divorce, the children would likely remain with their mother. Joe initially denied having an affair, but when faced with irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, he was forced to admit to secretly dating Nikki for some time. Although they had reportedly broken up for over a week before the incident, this revelation raised questions. Following the discovery of the body, the O'Reilly house was sealed off as a crime scene, and no one was allowed to enter while the police conducted a thorough investigation. During this time, Joe stayed with his sister, and the children stayed with their grandparents. At the funeral, Joe was surprisingly calm and appeared to avoid the casket containing his deceased wife's body. When it was his turn to say goodbye, he did so hastily and without emotion. As he left, he appeared unconcerned, saying that the casket could be closed and buried once the family was allowed to return home. When they returned, everything in the house appeared to be in the same condition as the day of the murder, except for the body on the floor. Joe asked his in-laws to accompany him to the scene of the crime, and they agreed, thinking he needed their emotional support. However, as they walked around the room where Rachel had been murdered, Joe began to speculate about the killer's actions. He graphically described the attack, pointing to dried blood spatters and reenacting the blows with his arms. Joe suggested that the perpetrator might have washed his hands and the crime weapon in the bathroom before taking it with him. Although his detailed and unsettling account seemed like an attempt to process his grief, his parents-in-law couldn't shake the feeling that he was reenacting the crime. Rose, in particular, secretly suspected that Joe might have been the one who killed their daughter. Immediately following the funeral, Joe began aggressively seeking media attention. He granted numerous interviews and even invited reporters into his home, providing them with a tour of the crime scene while recounting the events that transpired. 3 weeks after the tragedy, the Rachel loved ones agreed to participate in a television program about the crime. However, while Rachel's parents appeared to be overcome with grief, Joe's behavior on set was remarkably different. He interacted with the makeup team, showing concern for his on-camera appearance, and during breaks, he eagerly accepted and enjoyed the offered snacks and coffee, behaving more like a celebrity than a grieving family member. The police, who were still looking at Joe, decided to follow him and found that from the set he went straight to his mistress Nikki, who spent the night. By that time, the last doubts that he was the killer had already been dispelled, and it remained only to collect irrefutable evidence for the court. Collecting evidence proved to be a time-consuming and challenging task. The main piece of evidence, the murder weapon, remained elusive. Despite this, investigators accumulated enough supplementary evidence. Initially, 2 key witnesses, Nikki and Joe's colleague who corroborated his alibi, faced possible imprisonment for perjury, leading them to recant their earlier statements. Nikki revealed that her relationship with Joe never actually ended, they continued to see each other in secret. Rachel, who discovered their ongoing connection, got into a significant argument with Joe and his wife shortly before the tragedy. In contrast, Joe's colleague, although previously vouching for his whereabouts, could not confidently attest that Joe was at the bus station across town at the time of his wife's murder. He unknowingly corroborated his friend's story at his request, unaware that Joe was a suspect in the crime at the time. Emails retrieved from Joe's computer, in which he made disparaging comments about his wife and planned a future with his mistress and children, were also submitted as evidence in the case. Joe made a deliberate attempt to create an alibi by going to the gym and ensuring he was caught on camera. He then informed his colleagues that he would be unavailable due to a work commitment in another part of the city. However, instead of going to the bus station as claimed, Joe went home, armed himself with a dumbbell, and hid in the bedroom, waiting for his wife to return from taking the children to kindergarten. He launched a surprise attack on her from behind, leaving her no opportunity to defend herself. After committing the crime, Joe, who later admitted his actions, cleaned the blood from himself and the murder weapon in the bathroom next to the bedroom. He then changed his clothes, scattered his belongings around the house to make it appear like a robbery had occurred, and headed to work. While on his way to the office, Joe got rid of the items he had taken, disposed of the bloody clothes and dumbbells, and made several attempts to cover his tracks by calling his wife's phone, sending her messages, and leaving voicemails asking her to call him back. At the office, Joe exhibited unusual behavior, appearing overly excited and showing signs of nervousness, as evident from his slightly shaking hands. Some of his colleagues noticed his unusual behavior and asked if he was okay, but Joe seemed flustered and, instead of responding, quickly retreated to his office. Shortly after, he received a call from the daycare center informing him that no one had picked up their boys. Instead of rushing home, Joe sent his mother-in-law to discover his daughter's disfigured body first. He believed he had covered his tracks and that his guilt would be impossible to prove. However, his desire for fame and public attention ultimately worked against him. Although most of the evidence against Joe was circumstantial, he was not arrested until 2 years after the crime. His guilt was ultimately proven by tracing his movements on the day of the murder, using data from a cell phone he had kept with him. Notably, at the time of the murder, Joe's cell phone signal was tracked to the home, a fact later confirmed by phone records. Furthermore, it was revealed during the trial that the anonymous letter sent to Child Protective Services, which made false accusations against Rachel, was actually written by Joe's mother at his request. Joe's motive for the murder was to gain sole custody of the children in the event of a divorce. To achieve this, he attempted to discredit Rachel by portraying her as an abusive mother. However, social services found no evidence to support these claims, and Joe decided to take more drastic action. Joe showed no remorse in the courtroom, smiling and chatting with his lawyers as if he was confident he would be acquitted. However, in the summer of 2007, the court delivered a guilty verdict and sentenced him to life in prison. Despite the defense team's efforts to appeal the decision, all their attempts were unsuccessful. Interestingly, Joe's relationship with his mistress, Nikki, continued even after his imprisonment. She visited him regularly for many years, but they suddenly lost contact in 2022. Throughout his imprisonment, Joe has maintained his innocence and has been a model inmate, never causing any trouble. He hopes that this good behavior will eventually make him eligible for parole. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Fusako Sano. Nobuyuki was born on July 15, 1962, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata. He grew up in a wealthy family. His family's business, related to passenger transportation, was very successful, thanks to his 62-year-old father. Nobuyuki was a late child, with 5 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage. However, he is not really close to them. As a result, he grew up to be a spoiled and demanding child who always expected to get his own way, immediately. Nobuyuki often becomes aggressive when his expectations are not met in a timely manner. One notable incident occurred. He threw a tantrum in a store, punching his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. Nobuyuki struggled to form relationships with his peers due to his complicated and sometimes unusual behavior. He was also self-conscious about his height, which often caused him to hunch over. This behavior caused his classmates to tease him and give him unflattering nicknames. Despite this, Nobuyuki's family resided in a luxurious 2-story European-style house, which featured a spacious room specifically designed for him. The boy was uncomfortable in the room, fidgeting and expressing fear of being alone. This behavior led his parents to take him to see a doctor. After an initial review, he was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with multiple disorders, a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique of autophobia, fear of loneliness, sociophobia, anxiety related to social interactions. Essentially, he feared both being alone and being around others. As a result, he became a loner in high school, never forming close relationships with classmates, and never having a girlfriend despite his attractive appearance. His peers avoided him, and he became an outcast. The only people he felt comfortable expressing his anger and frustration to were his elderly parents, who forgave him and tried to calm him down with gifts and money. As an adult, he struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into conflicts with colleagues, neglected his responsibilities, and would often leave work in the middle of the day for no good reason, such as when it was raining and he felt sad. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female coworker, likely trying to get her attention out of sympathy. Although the incident was attributed to an accident, he was fired immediately. After being fired, Nobuyuki became unemployed and relied on his parents' financial support. Over time, he became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and frequently clashed with his parents. Following a particularly intense quarrel, Nobuyuki started a fire in his home, nearly destroying the house and putting its occupants in harm's way. Nobuyuki was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment, where he was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, extreme dislike and hatred of women. After a little over a month of treatment, he was discharged, deemed not to pose an immediate threat to others. For a brief period, Nobuyuki remained calm and even began rebuilding the partially burned house, adding a couple of new rooms. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction project. Nobuyuki became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He spent most of his time in his room, watching TV. He not only forbade his parents from entering his room, but also the second floor of the house. If they tried to cross this boundary, he would violently lash out at them, punching and threatening to kill them. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks, but he preferred to stroll near a local school where he could secretly watch the female students. At first, he kept his distance and tried not to communicate with anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a young girl, who was only 9 years old, and threw her over his shoulder as she was leaving the school gate. He then ran to his car, which was parked nearby. The other children immediately screamed for help, and a school security guard and bystanders quickly intervened, rescuing Shi and detaining Nobuyuki until the police arrived. Nobuyuki was unable to explain why he attacked Shi, and it was clear that he had intended to commit a violent and unlawful act against a minor. As a result, he was charged with attempting to commit a violent crime against a child. Nobuyuki Sato avoided a long prison sentence thanks to his father's connections and wealth. In August, Nobuyuki was given a year's probation despite his heinous crime. Shortly thereafter, his name was mysteriously removed from the criminal prosecution database, allegedly due to his father's intervention. However, Nobuyuki's father died shortly after his son's case, dying of a heart attack. Nobuyuki was left with overwhelming shame and guilt for his father's sacrifices and efforts to cover up his crime. After the failure of his first kidnapping attempt, Nobuyuki, 28 years old, tried again a year and a half later. This time, he carefully planned the crime and remained under the police radar for an extended period. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki set out on a hunting trip around the city. In the evening, as darkness fell, he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had stayed late after school due to a sports event, walking alone on a deserted road. Nobuyuki quickly pulled over in front of her, got out of the car with a knife, and grabbed Fusako. He threatened to slit her throat if she tried to scream or run away. Then, he forced her into the trunk of the car. After driving for a while, he turned into a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and covered her mouth with tape. When night fell, Nobuyuki drove to his house and took Fusako out of the trunk. Nobuyuki led her through a part of the house that was still under construction to his room, trying not to be seen. He then left the room and re-entered through the front door, as if everything was normal. Once upstairs, Nobuyuki again threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be quiet. He tied her to the bed and warned her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream, or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean, where no one would ever find it. Fusako was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's orders, hoping that he would eventually take pity on her and let her go. When Fusako didn't return home from school, her parents started to worry. They knew she had stayed late to watch a baseball game, but as the sun began to set, they expected her to be home by then. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to find their daughter on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. As night drew closer, the parents of Fusako turned to the police for help, hoping for a quick resolution. Since Fusako's disappearance, only a few hours had passed, and they were anxious to find her. The police launched a search operation. And by the next morning, they were joined by dozens of volunteers from the local community. The following day, the search party grew to over 200 people, who combed the area, distributed flyers with Fusako's photo, and interviewed passers-by in search of witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived close to Fusako's school and the police station. He had previously attempted to kidnap Fusako, which had brought him to the attention of the police. However, despite this, Nobuyuki was not considered a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father. A large-scale search operation was initiated to locate Fusako Sano, a Japanese schoolgirl who had disappeared. The search lasted for many months, covering numerous locations such as empty buildings, houses, railroad cars, and vacant lots. Investigators also searched suspicious vehicles and combed through interstate highways, but found no clues. As the investigation continued, authorities considered various theories, including the possibility of involvement by North Korean special services. However, despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful, and Fusako remained missing. Fusako later revealed that she was terrified during her captivity and followed Nobuyuki's instructions in the hope that he would eventually release her. However, her captor, Nobuyuki, had no intention of letting her go. For several months, he kept her bound with tight restraints that impaired her blood flow and caused her to lose sensation in her limbs. If she disobeyed or made a sound, he would punish her with a stun gun, beat her, or threaten her with a knife. Notably, Nobuyuki never assaulted Fusako in a sexual manner during her captivity. Instead, he treated her more like a possession or a pet, using her as a means of companionship and conversation. Nobuyuki kept Fusako captive, feeding her a meager diet of food prepared by his mother. As a result, Fusako became severely malnourished and weakened. He restricted her to her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in an unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he would bathe her in a basin, cut her hair and nails, and dress her in his own worn-out clothes. Despite her compliance, Nobuyuki would regularly beat her for his own amusement. Over time, Fusako's spirit was broken, and she became submissive, no longer attempting to escape or even look out the window. As the years passed, Nobuyuki stopped bothering to physically restrain Fusako, and didn't even think to lock the door when he stepped out. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels. Occasionally, he would turn on the radio or watch TV with her, but only to programs that interested him, such as Scottish or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he enjoyed himself. These were the only things Fusako had to read during her confinement. For nearly a decade, Fusako was isolated, never speaking to anyone else or leaving her room. She remained in bed most of the time, hardly moving or trying to resist her situation. Fusako had become so resigned to her fate that she no longer attempted to escape or call for help. Nobuyuki's mother lived in fear of her son's violence. For years, she had avoided the second-floor room because Nobuyuki had threatened her with violence. This was not an idle warning, as Nobuyuki actually pushed her down the stairs when she tried to enter the room. She retired in 1996 at the age of 73, and her circumstances became extremely difficult. Nobuyuki regularly abused her, forcing her to follow his rules. Desperate for help, she went to the police in the spring of 1996 and filed a report, stating that she was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her son. However, the police seemed reluctant to intervene and persuaded her to withdraw her statement, advising her to handle the situation on her own. She also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting that he be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Her concerns were ignored, and she was told her son's actions were not worth worrying about. Instead, she was advised to encourage him to seek help voluntarily. In January 2000, the elderly woman, exhausted from years of physical and emotional abuse, made a desperate call for help. She contacted the hospital and the police, requesting that they send the medical team and officers to her home. Her reason for calling was that her son, Nobuyuki, had brutally beaten her again, tied her up, and used a taser on her multiple times. Authorities finally responded to Shi's pleas for help and arrived at her house. When the ambulance and police car appeared, Nobuyuki became visibly agitated, aggressive, and resistant. He had to be restrained with handcuffs and sedated with a large dose of medication. Nobuyuki's mother confessed to the authorities that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and uncontrollable. She also revealed that she had not been allowed to access the second floor of her home for years, as Nobuyuki had forbidden it, threatening to kill her if she disobeyed. Upon entering the second floor and Nobuyuki's room, the police made a shocking discovery. A pile of blankets on the bed moved slightly, and when the officers peeled them back, they found a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hiding underneath. When questioned, she identified herself and revealed that she had been kidnapped by Nobuyuki while walking home from school a long time ago. After the discovery, the police brought Nobuyuki's mother into the room to ask if she knew the captive girl. However, she was shocked and claimed she had no idea that anyone else lived in the house besides her and her son. The kidnapped girl also claimed that she had never seen Shi before. During questioning, Nobuyuki made a shocking confession. He recalled the day he saw Fusako on the road and thought she was cute, so he decided to take her home with him. According to Nobuyuki, he took care of Fusako, feeding her, washing her, dressing her, and reading her comic books. He only punished her when she disobeyed him. Nobuyuki also admitted that he loved Fusako like a friend and believed she felt the same way about him. He had no intention of letting her go and hoped she would stay with him forever. He enjoyed spending time with her, talking to her for hours about soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. Nobuyuki claimed that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which led him to believe that she was happy living with him. A medical examination concluded that despite his mental disorder, Nobuyuki was able to understand his actions and thus was eligible to stand trial. However, questions were raised about whether his mother could be held accountable as an accomplice. She often bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which raised suspicions. Despite her repeated efforts to alert authorities and get medical help for her family, her concerns were consistently disregarded. The case drew widespread attention before the trial even began, the city police facing heavy criticism. Nobuyuki had previously been prosecuted for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl. But he had managed to avoid suspicion when he carried out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their posts for failing to control the situation from the start and making numerous mistakes. Nobuyuki Sato went on trial in May 2000. The prosecution thoroughly examined every detail of his actions, including minor offenses. Nobuyuki was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum term. He was released in the spring of 2015 after serving his sentence. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He was found dead about a year and a half later, in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. When Fusako was discovered, she was extremely weak and could barely stand. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. She also stuttered, was afraid of sunlight, and had lost most of her communication skills. Her parents didn't even recognize their daughter when they saw her after nearly a decade. It took Fusako about a year to recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to heal. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and became withdrawn, avoiding people. Her intelligence was also affected, remaining at the level of a 9-10 years old child. Her parents took her out of town, changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and refused to speak to the press. Over time, Sachiko made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. In 2007, a family outing took a devastating turn when her father accidentally drowned in a pond she tragically witnessed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sumner family. Carol and Reggie Sumner raised in Charleston, South Carolina. They were born in the same year, went to the same school, and were even in the same grade. Over time, their childhood friendship blossomed into a deeper affection. Neither of them recalls exactly when they began to develop romantic feelings for each other, but by the time they were 15 years old in 1959, they were dating. Their friends described them as a beautiful and harmonious couple. Reggie and Carol treasured their memories, keeping photos of their happy times together in their home archives. At the time, it seemed like they had their whole lives ahead of them, and they looked forward to a long and happy future together. Their feelings for each other were strong and mutual, and they were practically inseparable both in and out of school. They even started making plans to get married as soon as they turned 18, with the full support of their parents. In 1962, Reggie and Carol, a young couple, graduated from high school. However, their plans to get married were put on hold when Reggie was drafted into the Army a few months later. They decided to postpone their wedding until Reggie returned from his military service and made a promise to write each other regularly. As time passed, the separation took its toll. Reggie was deployed to Vietnam. Unfortunately, Carol lost contact with him, and she didn't even know if he was still alive. Despite the uncertainty, Carol continued her education and started working at the Charleston Air Force Base. A few years later, Carol got married, but the marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce. They didn't have any children together. In 1975, Carol married again, this time to Richard Alford, and gave birth to their daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. However, this marriage was also troubled, as Richard was abusive and had a drinking problem. The situation became unbearable for Carol, and by the mid-1980s, she couldn't take the abuse anymore. She took her daughter and filed for divorce. However, Richard refused to leave her alone and continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, Richard purchased a handgun and ammunition. After a night of heavy drinking, he went to his ex-wife Carol's home, intending to confront her. When Carol answered the door, their 10-year-old daughter Rhonda was present in the room. However, the presence of his child did not deter Richard, who was intoxicated. He pulled out the gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. Richard then drove to a secluded area, where he fired the remaining bullet into his temple, taking his own life. Carol was fortunate to survive the shooting due to the prompt response of neighbors, who heard the gunshots and Rhonda's cries for help. They called the police and an ambulance, which rushed Carol to the hospital. Carol's condition was critical, and she underwent several complex surgeries and blood transfusions. Although she eventually recovered, she suffered significant injuries, including complete blindness in her right eye and permanent disability. Years later, in the late 1990s, Carol's health began to deteriorate again. She experienced severe pain, weight loss, and weakness. After a thorough examination at the hospital, she received a devastating diagnosis: liver cancer. Tragically, as a result of being severely injured by gunshot wounds, Carol lost her position on an Air Force base. With cancer added to her medical complications, she found that physical strain, prolonged periods on her feet, and any heavy physical exertion exceeded her capability. Given these medical constraints, Carol then decided to re-enter the workforce as a call center operator for a cable television provider within her hometown, Charleston. Reggie was in Vietnam for a long time, and due to the prolonged war, he was severely wounded and nearly lost his leg. He spent a significant amount of time in the hospital, and during this period, his name was mistakenly listed among the dead. As a result, his relatives believed he had passed away. Reggie was fortunate to survive and eventually returned home. However, by then, he had lost touch with his former lover, Carol, who had moved to a different location, gotten married, and also assumed Reggie had died in the war. Years later, Reggie got married, but his war injuries led to the development of diabetes and other chronic diseases. He was never able to become a father, and eventually, his marriage ended in separation. Since then, he has lived alone. Reggie found work as a laborer at the local railroad and no longer expected any pleasant surprises from life. In the fall of 2000, Carol was having a typical day at work, answering phones and advising customers. When she picked up another call, she was shocked to hear a voice that sent shivers down her spine. It was a voice she knew all too well, her first high school love, Reggie. However, she was hesitant to respond, as she had thought Reggie was dead. After answering the customer's questions, Carol mustered up the courage to say Reggie's full name out loud. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Reggie's timid question. Carol burst into tears, revealing that she was he had dated in high school, the one he had once wanted to marry. For several minutes, they both cried, unable to speak. Eventually, they composed themselves and discovered that they still lived in their hometown. They agreed to meet the next evening, reuniting after all these years. The next day, Carol spent hours getting ready for the date, trying on different dresses and perfecting her hair and makeup. As she looked in the mirror, she was reminded that time had changed her. She was no longer the young, vibrant woman Reggie remembered from the past. Still, she was eager to win him over once more. Their meeting was thrilling for both, having spent decades apart, and their conversation was unrelenting as they recounted stories from their lives, both happy and sorrowful, covering their previous marriages. Professional triumphs, struggles, health challenges, and basking in nostalgia as they reflected on their lost romance and first true love for one another. Reggie and Carol were determined to make the most of their reunion after a period of separation. They quickly fell into a routine of spending every day together, and within a couple of weeks, they decided to take the next step by moving in together. Just 5 months later, they got married, and Carol joined her husband in his home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. As they settled into family life, they initially resided in their hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. They were deeply in love, happy, and enthusiastic about building a life together. However, they faced some challenges, particularly with their health, as they were both still young but struggling with health issues. One of the neighbors who lived nearby was the Cole family, with whom Reggie had a long-standing acquaintance. The patriarch of the family, Stephen, had experienced firsthand the traumatic effects of the Vietnam War. Sustaining severe wounds during combat had resulted in confinement to a wheelchair for many years. His wife, Natalie, often prioritized her social life, spending time with friends at bars after work, instead of rushing home to take care of her family. As a result, their daughter, Tiffany, found herself frequently neglected and left unattended from a young age. Tiffany's situation improved slightly when she befriended the new neighbors, Reggie and Carol. During this time, Tiffany was still in high school, and the compassionate Carol took an instant liking to she. Carol felt genuine sympathy for Tiffany. For 5 years, Carol did her best to support and care for Tiffany, sometimes sponsoring cozy family meals, buying Tiffany clothes, and sharing enough allowance. Carol treated Tiffany like a daughter, showering her with love, care, and attention. When the Carol and Reggie decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumina minivan in 2004, Tiffany asked to buy it from them on an installment plan, as she desperately needed a car but had no money. They kindly offered to sell it to her for a minimal amount, which they divided into 12 monthly payments. In early 2005, Carol and Reggie made a difficult decision to leave their home and relocate to Florida. Their health had begun to decline significantly, and doctors advised them to move to a warmer climate with ocean access. Since Carol and Reggie were both retired, they decided to make a big change and start over. Carol and Reggie sold their large home in Charleston and bought a new place in Jacksonville, Florida. They also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. They was very happy and settled into their new life, making plans for their future together. Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda every day to share her thoughts, plans, and daily experiences. However, in June 2005, Rhonda was surprised and concerned when her mother didn't call her as usual. At first, Rhonda tried to brush off her worries, hoping that everything was fine with her parents and that they would call her back soon. But when the next day passed without hearing from them, Rhonda's concern grew. She tried calling her parents' cell phones every 30 minutes, but they were now out of service. She also left messages on their home phone, but none of them were returned. Rhonda set out on a solo road trip to check on her mother and stepfather in another state. After a 5-hour drive, she arrived at their house. What struck her as unusual was the absence of a car in the driveway. Things only got stranger from there. As she approached the front door, she found it slightly ajar, an eerie quietness, and a light on in one of the rooms despite the bright sunlight outside. Rhonda called out for her mother and stepfather Reggie, but received no response. She ventured into the kitchen, where she was greeted by a scene that looked like a sudden and mysterious departure. A table was set for two, with food that appeared to have been left untouched for days. The rest of the house was also in disarray, with belongings scattered about and doors and cupboards left open. Adding to the sense of abandonment and unease, their bedroom showed signs of a thorough search, but it was unclear what the person was looking for or who was responsible. On the bedside table, essential medications were left behind, including her mother's cancer pills, which she took 3 times a day, and Reggie's insulin, which he administered hourly. Notably, their cell phones were completely out of battery, rendering them useless. Rhonda quickly realized that her mother and stepfather were unable to leave their home without their essential medications and cell phones. She immediately contacted the police to report the incident, alerting them to the suspicious individuals. They in the car was quickly added to the wanted list, and all bank cards belonging to Carol and Reggie were frozen. The first few days of the search yielded nothing, with no sign of the imposters or any witnesses. However, on June 12, several developments led the police to close in on the perpetrators. A crucial lead emerged when a man, claiming to be Reggie, contacted one of the banks, complaining that his card was blocked and he was unable to withdraw cash. A bank employee grew suspicious when checking the card information and offered to resolve the issue by visiting a nearby branch, but the caller, Mr. Reggie, hung up. Minutes later, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carroll, and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When the bank asked her to visit a branch in person, she refused, citing health issues, and urgently requested access to her savings. Her request was denied. The bank promptly handed over the call details and recordings to the police. The police investigation continued at the station, where they played the suspicious phone calls for Rhonda. She immediately confirmed that the voices did not belong to her Carol and Reggie. In fact, the voices sounded too young to be them. As a result, the authorities believed that the imposters were likely involved in the Carol and Reggie disappearance, either holding them captive or killing them after extracting information about their bank accounts and cards. The search for the missing couple led to a breakthrough a few days later, when their car was discovered abandoned on a remote road in a wooded area. A thorough examination of the vehicle revealed no signs of blood or struggle in the cabin. However, in the trunk, experts found hair and sweat marks that belonged to they. This suggested that they had been forcibly taken away in the trunk of their own car, leaving little hope for their safe return. The police investigated their bank transactions and found that money had been withdrawn from their account several times after they stopped hearing from their daughter. Reviewing the ATM surveillance footage revealed that the withdrawals were made by a young man who couldn't be identified right away. The police also requested a trace of all calls made from the phone number used by the imposters to contact the bank. Further investigation showed that the SIM card used to make those calls was purchased on a prepaid plan just before they disappeared. Unfortunately, the buyer's identity couldn't be determined, but it was discovered that the number was used to call a car rental company on June 6. Additionally, it was found that someone staying at a hotel had rented a Mazda RX-8 in the name of Tiffany Cole. Later, the same car was seen at the ATMs where the unidentified young man withdrew money from their accounts. A team of investigators used tracking beacons installed in rental cars to locate a Mazda RX-8, which was found parked at a hotel in Charleston. The car was linked to a couple who had been victimized by thieves, who had withdrawn $1,000 from her card and nearly $3,000 from her husband's card. A capture team was quickly dispatched to the hotel, where they burst into the room where the thieves were staying. The room was found to be filled with numerous packages and receipts from various stores, indicating that the thieves had been on a spending spree, purchasing items such as clothing, electronics, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive liquor. 3 people were found inside the location, clearly caught off guard by the police visit. Tiffany Cole, 23, her boyfriend Michael Jackson, 24, and Alan Lindell Wade, 19, all appeared surprised, confused, and frightened as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. The trio was taken to the police station, separated into different rooms for questioning, and initially pretended to be unaware of the accusations or refused to speak. A search of the premises uncovered significant evidence, including stolen bank cards, the laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, Reggie's expensive coin collection, the keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in Tiffany Cole's name. During the investigation, it was discovered that Tiffany had sold some of the stolen jewelry and spent the money with friends. After several hours of interrogation, Tiffany finally began to talk, bursting into tears as she confessed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple but claimed no further harm was done. The group then went on the run, using the stolen money for their own gain. Tiffany also implicated another individual, Bruce Kent Nixon, 19, who was paid $300 for his assistance in the crime. She stated that they never saw Bruce Kent Nixon again after the incident. Bruce Kent Nixon's decision to commit a crime was motivated by a promise of a fixed amount of money, which he quickly spent on illicit substances. As a result, he did not make an effort to hide or flee, living in the same city of Charleston. He was eventually arrested at his parents' home. It began in May 2005, when Tiffany visited the Summers to make a payment on a car she had purchased 6 months prior. The Summers, Carol, and Reggie were known for their hospitality and would often invite Tiffany to stay overnight or for a few days, treating her to good food and gifts. On this particular occasion, Tiffany arrived with her new boyfriend, and they were both welcomed to dinner and invited to stay overnight. During dinner, the Summers discussed their new life, and Carol inadvertently revealed that they had nearly $100,000 left over from the sale of their Charleston home, which they intended to use to enjoy their retirement without financial worries. Unbeknownst to her, Carol's careless comment sealed her in her husband's fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged a telling glance, and that night, they began secretly plotting to get their hands on the Summers' substantial sum of money. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael bid they farewell and returned to South Carolina. Within a couple of weeks, they recruited accomplices and assigned roles and responsibilities. They then set their plan in motion. On June 6, Tiffany rented an unassuming car. Meanwhile, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to the outskirts of Jacksonville, where they identified a secluded spot in the woods and started digging a deep hole, which would ultimately become the Summers' grave. On the morning of July 8, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store, which she later provided to her accomplices, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan. That evening, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan approached the home of their intended victim. pretending to need assistance and asking to use the phone. Despite finding the young men suspicious, the homeowner, Carol, allowed them to enter. As soon as they were inside, they attacked Carol and her husband, who had rushed to her aid, threatening them with a toy gun. The Carol and Reggie was then bound with duct tape, blindfolded, and interrogated about the location of valuable items in the house, including their bank account information and PIN codes. They provided this information in an attempt to save their lives, as they were subjected to torture and death threats. After obtaining the necessary details, 2 additional individuals entered the house, assisting in dragging the Carol and Reggie into the backyard. They was then forced into the trunk of their own car, a Lincoln, which was being driven by Alan and Bruce Kent Nixon. Following behind them in a rented Mazda ARX-8 were Tiffany and Michael. The plan was that if a police patrol intercepted the car carrying the captive couple, a second car would draw the officers' attention away by recklessly speeding or breaking traffic rules. However, no police were encountered, and both cars reached their destination without incident. In the trunk, Reggie managed to free his arm and remove the bandages and duct tape covering his and his wife's faces, allowing them to breathe. However, there was no time to make any further attempts to escape. As the trunk lid opened, the Carol and Reggie was shocked and bewildered to see among their kidnappers Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had visited them recently. The kidnappers led the captive Carol and Reggie several dozen meters through the woods to a pre-dug grave. The Carol and Reggie begged for mercy, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The young kidnappers brutally murdered them by burying them alive. According to Bruce Kent Nixon, the kidnappers spent about an hour burying the Carol and Reggie under earth. Throughout the horrific ordeal, the bound and helpless Carol and Reggie cried, confessed their love for each other, and said their goodbyes. The investigation revealed that the spouses had died from suffocation, with soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs, indicating they had been buried alive. After committing the heinous crime, the perpetrators abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They then went to the Sumner house, where they stole all the valuables they could find, before returning to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their freedom was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all participants in the crime were arrested 4 days later. During the trial, Bruce Kent Nixon was the only one who fully admitted his guilt from the beginning and cooperated with the investigation, hoping for a lighter sentence. He led the authorities to the burial site of the spouses and provided a detailed account of the events of that fateful night. In contrast, Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend, Michael, was the mastermind behind the crime, driven by greed after learning about the large sum of money the Sumner family had received from the sale of their house. Tiffany's lawyer argued that she was merely an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder. Michael and Alan chose not to testify, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The jury did not believe Tiffany Cole was innocent because she was involved in planning the crime, rented a car, and created a diversion in case they were chased by police. She also helped dig a grave for the victims and sold stolen items at a pawn shop, using the money to buy clothes and rent a limousine to celebrate their success, as seen in numerous photos. As a result, Bruce Kent Nixon was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while Michael Jackson, Tiffany, and Alan Lindell were given the death penalty. The criminals filed multiple appeals, but they were all denied, and the sentence remained unchanged. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kaler family. James Craig Kaler was born in Weatherford, Texas in 1963, and his future wife, Karen Kaler, was born in the same city 2 years later. They met in the early 1980s while attending a university in Texas. At the time, Craig was a senior studying engineering, and Karen was a freshman in the humanities department. Despite their different fields of study, they quickly discovered common interests and started a romantic relationship. After graduating, they had a small, intimate wedding with close friends and family. They welcomed their first child, Emily, in 1991, followed by Lauren in 1993. The family lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle, with a higher-than-average income for their area. In 1999, Craig received a lucrative job offer from a major utility company in Weatherford, which coincided with the birth of their son, Sean. Craig adored his son and, with his increased salary, purchased a spacious house in the city's most prestigious neighborhood and a family car. Karen stayed at home to care for their children, and Craig became the primary breadwinner. From the outside, their family appeared to be living a perfect life. Their 3 children have also had many successes in their fields. Emily and Lauren are talented in sports and music. Emily studies at a prestigious pharmacy college and Lauren hopes to attend a conservatory. Sean, on the other hand, showed a keen interest in mathematics and had dreams of becoming an archaeologist. The family's home life seemed idyllic, Craig providing for the family and Karen taking care of the household and raising the children. However, the family was struggling with hidden problems. In 2007, Karen confided in her sister Linda, revealing that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown due to Craig's controlling behavior. Craig exerted total control over Karen's daily life, demanding a detailed account of every expense, no matter how small, and requiring her to report her whereabouts at all times. The family lives on a strict schedule, with Craig setting their daily routines, including bedtime, wake-up time, meal times. This rigidity makes Karen feel suffocated and trapped. Over time, Craig's need for control grew stronger. He became more demanding and selfish, scheduling Karen's every move. She felt like she had no time left for herself, there was only duty to complete. Karen tried to meet her husband's demands, hoping he would ease up and they could return to their normal life. However, Craig seemed to enjoy exerting control and refused to change. Linda was extremely worried about her sister's confide. Like everyone else, she saw Craig as the ideal husband, father, and family man, only to discover he was a controlling man. Despite this, Karen didn't want to break up her family. Additionally, she and her children relied on Craig financially. So, she decided to find a job that would give her a stable income. She joined a local gym without telling her husband, using it as an escape to clear her mind and work through her emotions. She spent several hours there every day, scheduling her time around her husband Craig's work schedule so he wouldn't notice. Not long after, the gym manager noticed her because of her attractive appearance, excellent fitness, and her hard work. Karen was given the chance to work as a fitness with the possibility of a permanent contract. This was a dream come true for her, as she could now get paid for doing something she loved. However, she was worried about how her husband, Craig, would react when he found out. When Craig found out about Karen's new job, she thought he would be angry and forbid her to continue. Surprisingly, he received this news calmly and even seemed pleased that she had found a way to make money on her own. He had a few conditions. She had to be home when he arrived, cook meals, and not let her new job interfere with their intimate life. Karen found these conditions acceptable, as she now had more freedom and independence. As Karen settled into her new job, she met a new instructor named Sunny Reese, and they quickly became friends. For Karen, who had spent years at home with little social interaction, Sunny became a trusted confidant. The two women spent time together at work, went for walks, had coffee, and shared heartfelt conversations. But little did Karen know, this new friendship would soon lead to unexpected romance and a complicated love triangle. It didn't take long for Karen and Sunny's friendship to evolve into a romantic relationship. At first, they kept their feelings a secret from everyone. However, after some time, Karen decided it was necessary to be honest with her husband, Craig. She spent months preparing for this conversation, searching for the right words and worrying about the potential consequences. Eventually, she confessed to Craig. Craig's reaction to his wife's revelation was surprisingly calm. However, the next day, he made an unexpected condition for accepting Karen's relationship with Sonny, which was that he wanted to be a part of it. Karen was shocked and unsure of how to respond to her husband's talk. Nevertheless, Craig took the initiative and began wooing Sonny, sending her flowers and gifts. He seemed to view this as an opportunity to revitalize his intimate life and bring new passion to his marriage. Initially, Karen and Sonny agreed to Craig's proposal. However, they soon realized that his intentions were aimed at domination. However, their unusual love triangle was short-lived. Craig demanded that Karen end the affair immediately. Despite this, Karen continued to see Sonny, as she had genuinely fallen in love. After almost 20 years of marriage, Karen seemed ready to leave her husband for someone new. This led to a series of secret actions, including moving to another state, scheduling secret meetings. In an attempt to salvage his family, Craig thought it best to relocate to another state. He started job hunting, sending out his resume, and soon secured a role as a water director for a large company in Columbia, Missouri, not far from Kansas. Craig hoped that by moving to a new state, his wife's affair with Sonny would end, and their family life would normalize. However, the summer 2008 move proved challenging for the family, as the kids had to switch schools, make new friends, and adapt to a new city. Although the family was already financially comfortable, Craig's new job nearly doubled his previous salary from Weatherford. Despite his increased responsibilities and work hours, Craig mistakenly believed he had successfully removed Sonny from his wife's life. However, Karen and Sonny continued to communicate regularly through calls, texts, and secret meetings. They would meet halfway, spend a couple of hours in a roadside hotel, and then return home. At this point, Karen realized her marriage was over. She no longer loved Craig, and it was only a matter of time before they divorced. These clandestine meetings persisted until December 2008. At the New Year's Eve celebration that year, the Kaler family went back to their hometown to reconnect with relatives and friends. Sonny was also in attendance at the gathering. Initially, Karen and Sonny kept a low profile, merely exchanging greetings. As the celebration continues and the alcohol slowly affects Karen and Sonny's behavior, they seem to have no regard for social norms. They became inseparable, openly showing affection by holding hands, sharing romantic glances, they even kissed. Craig's anger boiled over into fury after Karen publicly humiliated him by revealing her affair at a party attended by dozens of acquaintances. He lashed out at Karen and Sonny before dragging Karen away from the party. In his rage, Craig lost control and physically assaulted Karen, ripping her dress and slapping her, causing her to fall and hit her head. The incident marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. A few days later, Karen announced she was leaving Craig and initiated divorce proceedings, seeking custody of their children. Initially, Craig attempted to apologize and salvage their relationship for the sake of the children. But Karen was resolute. She said they should divorce, causing Craig to contact friends and family, begging them to convince Karen to reconsider. In the spring of 2009, Craig and Karen's marriage continued to deteriorate. Despite Craig's attempts to salvage their relationship, Karen made it clear she was leaving him for Sonny and she had never been truly happy in their marriage. The tension between them escalated into physical violence, with Craig grabbing Karen during an argument, leaving bruises on her arms. Karen reported the incident to the police, leading to Craig's arrest. After the incident, Karen took the children and moved out without waiting for the divorce to be finalized. Craig was devastated by her departure and even more so when he discovered that his daughters, Emily and Lauren, were siding with their mother. They told him that they had never seen their mother so happy, which Craig perceived as a betrayal. As a result, he cut off contact with his daughters, only spending time with his son Sean on weekends. Despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, Craig held on to the hope that Karen would change her mind and return to him. His desire to control her led him to engage in jealous behavior, including stalking her and attempting to install a hidden camera in her home. To pursue this, Craig sacrificed his work, initially taking vacation time, then claiming illness, and eventually skipping work altogether without explanation. This reckless behavior resulted in Craig's termination from his job. Without a steady income, he was forced to move in with his parents as he could no longer afford to live on his own. With ample free time, Craig began stalking Karen, prompting her to take him to court to obtain a restraining order. In November 2009, just before Thanksgiving, Karen took her children to visit their 89-year-old grandmother, Dorothy White, in Burlingame, Kansas. On the evening of November 29th, the Burlingame police received a distress call about a suspicious van and reports of gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors reported witnessing a small truck pull up to her house. A man exit the vehicle and enter the house. They claimed to have heard screams and gunshots, but were uncertain. The man then left the house, got back into the truck, and sped away. The neighbors did not attempt to apprehend him, fearing he was armed. When police arrived, they were met by 10-year-old Sean Kaler, who was frantically calling for help. Although Sean was unable to explain what had happened, it was clear that a horrific scene awaited the police. Inside the home, near the front door, Sonny was found lying in a pool of blood but surprisingly still alive despite having 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, police discovered the lifeless body of 44-year-old Karen, who had been shot in the chest and then fatally shot at close range in the head. The body of her oldest daughter, 18-year-old Emily, was found between a wall and a couch. It appeared that Emily had attempted to hide from her enraged father but was caught and killed with 2 point-blank shots. Lauren, found in a pool of blood in the second-floor bedroom, was still alive but weakly called for help and repeatedly said that her father was the one who did it. Dorothy and Lauren were rushed to a nearby hospital's intensive care unit. Despite the doctor's efforts, Lauren died on December 1st due to massive blood loss and internal organ damage. Her great-grandmother passed away a few hours later. Sean, the only surviving witness, was in shock. Psychologists worked with him, but a thorough interrogation was necessary as he was the only living witness to the tragic events at his great-grandmother's house. Sean recounted that evening, stating that his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he approached her to ask for his favorite pie. Suddenly, the back door swung open, and his father entered with a shotgun, pointing it at Karen without a word. He shot her, then moved closer and fired again. Sean was initially frozen in horror. His father then turned to Sean but didn't aim the gun. Instead, Craig stared at Sean silently and intently. Sean realized he had to escape. So he jumped out the open back door. He ran towards the main entrance, hoping to alert his grandmother, sisters, and call for help. However, upon reaching the threshold, he heard several more gunshots. Fearing what he might find inside, Sean hid in a small outbuilding. He heard more gunshots and waited in terror, afraid that his father would come after him. Craig Kaler was immediately added to the wanted list, with a warning that he was armed and extremely dangerous. As police received multiple reports of a speeding truck, they were able to quickly determine the direction the gunman was heading. At one point, Craig abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down a deserted road. Law enforcement soon caught up with him and apprehended him the next morning. Upon arrest, police found the rifle and ammunition in the back seat of the abandoned vehicle, along with prescription medication for depression and anxiety disorders near the driver's seat. Craig did not resist arrest and appeared confused and frightened. He admitted to being armed with a gun and a hunting knife, but claimed he did not intend to use them. He also acknowledged that he had done something terrible, which he believed the police already knew about. At the police station, Craig fully confessed to his crimes and opened up to the investigating officer. He shared how his wife had cheated on him with someone named Sonny and how they had humiliated him in front of friends at a New Year's Eve party. He explained how his attempts to save his marriage had cost him his job and what was left of his self-respect. Craig became emotional, stating that he didn't know how he had decided to take such drastic action and felt that everyone, including his daughters, had betrayed him. Craig's trial started in December 2010. Craig, advised by his lawyer Thomas Heaney, retracted his initial confession. He claimed his actions were due to mental illness and insanity, which was his only defense to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney argued that Craig was in a fragile mental state following a series of personal setbacks. His wife had left him for someone else, his children sided with their mother, he lost his job, and had to move back in with his parents. According to Heaney, these factors led to a breakdown, and Craig committed the crime while insane, without realizing what he was doing. However, the prosecution found no evidence of insanity or an altered mental state in Craig's actions. They argued that his actions were calculated, as he had purchased guns and ammunition in advance and went to the victim's house knowing his family was there. He shot each victim twice, ensuring no chance of survival, but intentionally spared his son Sean, allowing him to escape. In August 2011, Craig was found guilty on all counts and received a death sentence. At the final hearing, 12-year-old Sean testified, stating that he didn't want his father to die, as he was his only remaining close relative. Despite multiple appeals by Craig and his lawyers, the verdict has remained unchanged. As of today, Craig is still in prison, fighting to have the case reviewed and the death sentence overturned. After the death of his mother and sisters, Sean moved in with his grandmother. Now Sean has grown up and he has completed his studies and chosen to stay and work in his hometown. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Callie Ann Poulton. Callie Ann Poulton was born on September 20, 1989, in Rochester, New York. As an only child, she received all the love and attention from her parents. However, when Callie turned 3, her parents decided to divorce, and she stayed with her mother, Judy. Despite the divorce, Callie's father maintained a good relationship with Judy and regularly visited his daughter. After the divorce, Judy moved to a quiet suburban apartment complex in Rochester. Although Callie's father helped with childcare, Judy faced financial difficulties. To make ends meet, she took on a part-time job delivering magazines to her neighbors. Her goal was to save enough money to take Callie on a trip to Disney World the following summer. On the evening of May 23, 1994, Judy was preparing for her delivery shift. She was at home, inserting leaflets into the magazines, when Callie asked to go for a walk. It was an evening, and Callie wanted to ride her tricycle. Judy checked outside and saw other children playing in the yard, so she allowed Callie to go out for a short time, instructing her to stay within the yard. Callie ran outside with her tricycle, and Judy planned to finish preparing the magazines and then take Callie to McDonald's after completing her delivery route. Judy stepped outside with the magazines, intending to call out to her daughter Callie, but Callie was nowhere to be seen. Judy looked around the yard, called out her daughter's name, but there was no response. She searched the yard and then the surrounding complex grounds, but Callie was gone. Usually, when Callie rode her tricycle, the creaking of its wheels was noticeable, but now there was silence. As Judy's panic grew, she began to cry out for her daughter, drawing the attention of the neighbors. They joined her in searching for Callie, but no one had seen Callie. The complex was heavily wooded, and a fence separated the houses from the nearby highway, making it unlikely that Callie could have wandered off on her own. Judy knew that Callie was only allowed to ride her tricycle in their yard, and Callie had always obeyed her mother before. It was also unlikely that Callie could have gone far on her small bike without being seen. With each passing minute, Judy's fears grew, and she decided to call the police. The officers arrived quickly and began a thorough search of the complex. As the search continued, officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen Callie. Police suspected that Callie was still in the complex, and they believed the suspect was likely a resident of the complex. It would have been difficult for an outsider to get inside, kidnap Callie, and drive away without being noticed. To assist in the search, residents of the 300-apartment complex voluntarily allowed police to enter their homes. In case there was no one in the house, the complex manager used the spare key to search. Unfortunately, searching each apartment yielded no results. Callie and her bike were not found. After an all-night search, the case was reclassified as a kidnapping at around 4 a.m. A specialist unit took over the case, and detectives questioned Judy about possible enemies. They asked Judy if Callie's father was involved, but Judy ruled this out and said he had no motive. Detectives also asked if Judy had noticed anyone suspicious among the residents. She mentioned Mark, a 22-year-old man who had just moved in with his wife and young son. Judy noticed Mark's behavior was unusual. Judy and Mark spoke briefly a few times, and during one conversation, Mark commented that Callie was beautiful. Although Judy had heard similar comments from others, Mark's tone made her uncomfortable. What really caught her attention, however, was when Mark added that he had spied on all the little girls in the complex and that Callie was the most beautiful. Judy became increasingly wary of Mark after their conversations, and she made an effort to limit her interactions with him. Even though they still occasionally crossed paths in the yard. One conversation in particular raised her suspicions. Mark asked Judy if Callie would tell Judy if someone tried to touch her. Judy found this question alarming and quickly ended the conversation. As a result, she no longer allowed Callie to play with Mark's son, even when she was present. During her conversation with detectives, Judy recalled a detail that had previously seemed insignificant. When she was searching for Callie, she had asked Mark if he had seen Callie, and he claimed he did. Judy also noticed that Mark's sneakers were missing their laces, but at the time, she was too worried about Callie to think much of it. The detectives brought Mark in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in Callie's disappearance. He even agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. However, Judy's own account provided Mark with an alibi, as she had seen him on the playground with his son at the time she was searching for Callie. The police also searched Mark's apartment but found no sign of Callie or her bicycle. As a result, Mark was no longer considered a suspect, and the investigation continued without any leads. The police investigation into Callie's disappearance began by questioning her mother, Judy, as a standard procedure. Judy cooperated fully, answering all their questions, but she found it distressing that the police were focusing so much on her when they had no other leads. As the search for Callie continued, the case received widespread attention, with news reports, billboards, and flyers throughout the city. The police received over 1,000 of tips, but unfortunately, each one led to a dead end, and the case remained unsolved for months. Despite the lack of progress, Judy remained hopeful that her daughter would be found alive. She quit her job to devote all her time to the search, printing and posting flyers, contacting media outlets, and working tirelessly to keep the case in the public eye. With the help of some compassionate supporters, she was able to raise $100,000 as a reward for any useful information. Judy's efforts led to national television coverage, including appearances on The Oprah Winfrey Show and a popular TV show about unsolved crimes. Judy also partnered with local businesses to distribute flyers in their offices, establishments, and on commercial vehicles. She even convinced 2 airlines to include the flyers in ticket envelopes. Although these efforts generated new leads, the police were unable to make any significant progress in solving the case. The turning point in the case occurred when a woman called the police on August 9, 1996 to report a serious argument with her husband. She was tired of his strange behavior and wanted a divorce. In an attempt to persuade her to stay, the husband confessed to a shocking crime. He had killed Callie. The woman was stunned and immediately called 911 and revealed her husband's identity to the police. The husband's name is none other than Mark Christie, Judy's neighbor. However, the detectives faced a significant obstacle. Under state law, any information shared between spouses was protected and inadmissible in court. This meant that even if Mark's confession was true, the police couldn't use it as evidence to arrest or question him. Furthermore, Mark had been in his yard with his child shortly after Callie's disappearance, and his apartment had been searched early in the investigation, making it unlikely that he had the opportunity to kidnap and kill her. The detective in charge of the case, Detective Crow, decided to talk to Mark after hearing his wife's story. Mark and his family had moved out of the complex just weeks after Callie went missing due to serious allegations. Mark had been accused by the 2 girls' parents of standing naked in front of his house, which made the detective suspicious. Although no investigation had been launched, the incident appeared to be suspicious. Crow traveled to Mark's new home, 50 miles from Rochester, but encountered resistance. Mark's mother opened the door and said her son would not talk to the police without an attorney present. Mark learned about his wife calling the police and contacted a lawyer. This meant that the police could not use Mark's confession to his wife as evidence, and his lawyer could prevent any questioning. Despite this, Crow persisted. While talking to Mark's mother, Mark appeared and Crow persuaded him to answer some questions about Callie's case. Crow suggested they discuss the matter over coffee at a nearby restaurant. Mark agreed to Crow's surprise, but only on the condition that Crow would then take him to see his lawyer. Crow and Mark stopped at a nearby Italian restaurant. Crow tried to engage in the conversation normally, avoiding any pressure or tense questions. This approach seemed to work as Mark began to open up more while they waited for their food. Mark expressed deep remorse for his actions towards Callie and explained that her image had haunted him for the past 2 years, constantly appearing on news reports and flyers. Crow tried not to scare Mark. Crow had spoken to Mark before in the early stages of the investigation. But this new conversation felt different. Crow believed that Mark was feeling proud of having avoided capture, so Crow decided to appeal to Mark's ego. Crow told Mark that Mark was actually smarter than the entire investigation team, and Mark responded by saying that he didn't want to sound boastful, but his method of handling the bike was actually very smart. Mark offered to share details about how he got rid of the bike, but only on the condition that Mark wouldn't discuss anything else. Crow maintained a friendly and non-threatening tone, reassuring Mark that he was in control of the conversation and could share as much or as little as he wanted. Mark said that Callie's tricycle had been in his apartment 3 days after she went missing. Mark knew that the police would probably search every apartment without a warrant when a child was in danger, but Mark found a loophole in the law. Although police could search for a missing child, they were not allowed to search for physical evidence. This meant they could only test spaces that were large enough for a child to fit. To hide the bike, Mark decided to disassemble it and hide the bike's parts in small and hard-to-reach areas of his apartment. He wrapped some parts in clothes and put them in the closet, and put other parts in small bags and took them out to the car. He then dumped the pieces in various locations far from home. Meanwhile, the police were stationed at the exit of the complex, checking each car, but since they were only looking for Callie, the small bags containing the bike parts did not arouse any suspicions. Detective Crow saw an opportunity to get a full confession from Mark. Crow took a sympathetic approach, suggesting that Callie's death may have been an accident and not Mark's fault. Mark asked about the sentence he could face, and Crow estimated it could be about 25 years. Mark felt this was unfair, as it meant he had to spend half his life in prison and away from his family. He also mentioned that he had lived with guilt for 2 years, implying that this should be taken into account when sentencing. Despite Mark's questionable logic, Crow continued to encourage Mark to confess, suggesting it would bring him relief. Mark agreed to tell the truth, but only after consulting with a lawyer. Crow knew that Mark's lawyer would advise Mark against confessing to a crime without solid evidence. So, Crow decided to be straightforward with Mark, explaining that if he didn't tell the truth, Callie's parents would never know what happened to their daughter. Mark responded by saying that Callie hadn't suffered. Crow senses that Mark was confessing and encourages him to do the right thing. Mark looked at Crow and finally admitted to his actions. He repeated that Callie hadn't suffered, and Mark confessed to strangling her with his bare hands. He then added that he hadn't done anything else to her. Mark recounted the events of that evening, explaining that Callie had come to his apartment and asked to play with his 1.5-year-old son. Mark let her in and took her bike to the kitchen. Aware that Callie's mother wouldn't approve of her visiting, Mark let Callie go upstairs to play with the child without drawing Judy's attention to the situation. However, when Mark heard Judy calling out for her daughter in the yard about 10 minutes later, he panicked. He knew that Judy would be furious if she discovered that he had let Callie into his house without permission. In a moment of desperation, Mark went upstairs to the children's room and strangled Callie with his bare hands. Detective Crow was skeptical about certain aspects of Mark's story from the start. It seemed more plausible that Mark had lured Callie into his apartment under false pretenses, taking advantage of his wife's absence at work. Once inside, Mark might have attempted to molest Callie, but when he heard Judy calling out for her daughter, he may have panicked and killed Callie to avoid being exposed. Crow recalled that Judy had seen Mark wearing sneakers without laces, which suggested that he had used them to strangle Callie. This detail implied premeditation, contradicting Mark's claim that the crime was spontaneous. To avoid raising Mark's suspicions, Crow decided to continue listening to his story. Mark claimed that after the murder, he left Callie's body in the kitchen and took his son outside to establish an alibi. He deliberately allowed Judy to see him in the playground, hoping to deflect any suspicion. Once Judy began searching the complex, Mark returned home and hid Callie's body in a laundry basket, covering it with clothes. A short time later, he placed the basket in the trunk of his car. Mark confessed that the chaos of the search, with many people looking for Judy's daughter, allowed him to carry out these actions unnoticed. Mark took his son and drove to the building where he worked as a security guard. He parked near the back, left the basket with Callie's body by the door, and then entered the building through the main entrance, telling his co-workers he had forgotten something at work. His toll didn't raise any suspicions. So he made his way to the back door, which he opened from the inside, and retrieved the basket. Mark then climbed onto a large tank containing liquid coolant, opened the top, and dropped Callie's body into it after tying a heavy metal object to her. He got rid of Callie's clothes but left her earrings on. After disposing of the body, Mark returned home and joined the neighbors in searching for Callie. By doing so, he had already removed the body from the complex before the police became involved, and no one suspected anything. At the end of his confession, Mark expressed regret for killing Callie, stating it was a mistake. Crow paid for their food, and Mark left a $2 tip before willingly going with Crow to the police station, where he was arrested for murder. When Mark's lawyer found out about the confession, he attempted to retract it, but the attempt was unsuccessful. This was because Mark had provided the information willingly, and Detective Crow had followed proper procedures. As a result, the police went to Mark's workplace, opened the tank, and made a gruesome discovery. Even after 2 years, the victim's body was still inside. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, experts were unable to determine the cause of death or gather any further information. They confirmed the identity of the remains, which was none other than Callie. Mark admitted his guilt to the judge and received a minimum 25-year prison sentence, just as Detective Crow had predicted. Although Mark's lawyer managed to have the kidnapping charges dropped, he was still convicted of murder. However, Mark's case took a surprising turn in 2010. The police reopened a 1988 case involving the brutal murder of 74-year-old Viola Manville, who was killed while walking in a Rochester suburb. At the time, Mark was just 16 years old and was considered a suspect, but he passed a polygraph test, showing no signs of deception. As a result, another man, Frank Sterling, was arrested and eventually confessed to the crime after a lengthy overnight interrogation. Years later, Frank tried to appeal his sentence, claiming that the police had coerced his confession and that he was disoriented by the end of the interrogation. However, his appeals were unsuccessful until 2010, when the case was reopened and new evidence was sent to the lab. DNA analysis revealed the suspect's DNA matched not Frank's, but Mark Christie's. Mark, 39 at the time, admitted to murdering Viola in 2011 and received an additional 28 years in prison. Despite his confession, he showed no remorse and never revealed his motives for the crime. Meanwhile, Frank was finally released from prison after 19 years of wrongful imprisonment. He went on to sue the authorities and was awarded nearly $10 million in 2014. However, his life was cut short when he died of a heart attack in 2017 at the age of 54. Mark is currently serving his sentence in prison, but he may be eligible for parole in the near future. It's unclear whether he will be released, and his case serves as a reminder of the importance of thorough investigations. If the investigators had not mistakenly focused on Frank and coerced a false confession, Mark might have been caught earlier and possibly prevented from committing another crime, the murder of Callie. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of the Harvey family. Brian Taba Harvey, 49, was a local icon who rose to fame in the 1980s as the lead singer and songwriter of the indie band House of Freaks. Although he and his musical partner Johnny Hott went their separate ways professionally in the 1990s, they remained close friends. A dedicated musician, Brian performed on stage for the final time on New Year's Eve, unaware that it would be the last night of his life. On the other hand, Catherine Gravinsky, 39, found success as co-owner of World of Mirth, a popular toy store in Richmond's Carytown district. She was an artist who pursued various endeavors, including painting sets for community theater, working as a pastry chef, and waitressing. Catherine had an older sister, Shelley Gravinsky, and was also the half-sister of actor Stephen Culp, known for his roles in TV shows such as The West Wing and Desperate Housewives, as well as various films. Brian and Catherine's paths crossed at the Border Cafe on Main Street, where Catherine worked and Brian frequently visited with Johnny. In 1990, Brian and Catherine got married. The House of Freaks then released an album featuring a song called I Got Happy, which was dedicated to Catherine. The couple had 2 daughters. Their first daughter, Stella, was born in 1996. After becoming a father, Brian realized that having children helped him find meaning in life and the importance of keeping hope for his children's future. Their second daughter, Ruby, was born in 2001. While working in the computer department of the Henrico County school system, Brian continued to pursue his passion for music. Meanwhile, Catherine started her own business, opening a unique toy and gift store called World of Mirth in the Carytown neighborhood. The store was designed to be a welcoming space for parents and children to spend time together, and children are free to play with the available toys. Brian Harvey's family lives in a quiet, quaint neighborhood south of Richmond. Their two-story red brick house was surrounded by large trees, porch swings, and ivy-covered gardens. They had a cozy family room in the basement. The family was well respected and loved in the community, and it seemed no one had any ill will towards them. On New Year's Day, 2006, Brian, his wife Catherine, and their two daughters, Stella and Ruby, were preparing for a busy day. They were hosting a barbecue lunch for friends and family, a tradition they enjoyed every year on this day. They woke up early to get everything ready. That Sunday morning, Brian went outside to collect the newspaper, absorbed in the front-page news. He didn't lock the door when he came back in, which wasn't unusual for them, especially on party days when friends would be arriving. The neighborhood was considered safe, so they didn't think much of it. However, on that day, Brian was unaware that some criminals were secretly lurking nearby. Catherine was busy in the kitchen, preparing cookies for the guests who were expected to arrive soon. Suddenly, she heard voices coming from the living room and thought that some guests had arrived early. But when she went to check, she was shocked to see two strangers instead of familiar faces. Later, Brian, Catherine, and their young daughter Ruby were ordered to go downstairs to the basement playroom. Stella, who had spent the night at a friend's house, had not yet arrived home. Once the family was in the small room, the intruders used electrical cords and packing tape to tie them up. The intruders told them that as long as they cooperated, no one would get hurt while they searched the house. Just as the intruders were starting to ransack the house, someone knocked on the front door at around 10 a.m. The leader of the intruders untied Catherine and told her to answer the door. However, he warned her that if she tried to escape or ask for help, her daughter and husband would be killed. Catherine was in a difficult situation. Stella was about to arrive, and if she answered the door, she would put her daughter in danger. On the other hand, if she didn't answer the door, the intruder might get angry and hurt her family. In the end, Catherine decided that it was best to cooperate, so she opened the door. Stella suddenly ran past Catherine and into the playroom, where the family usually spent a lot of time together. Catherine quickly intervened, stopping Stella's friend from following her. Kieran Perkinson, the friend's mother, later expressed her surprise at Catherine's unusual behavior. When Perkinson asked Catherine how she was feeling, Catherine said she was not well. Then, she made a circular motion with her hand, mimicking a gun and pointing it at her head. This abruptly ended the conversation, and Catherine shut the door. This strange gesture would later trouble Perkinson, wondered if Catherine was trying to convey something. She wondered if Catherine being monitored by the intruders. Perkinson left, intending to return later for a party. All four members of the Harvey family were now inside the house. Catherine went back to the basement and found Stella had been securely tied up alongside the rest of the family. Everyone was caught helpless and defenseless. Chaos broke out unexpectedly and without any prior indication. The assailant revealed a knife taken from the Harvey's kitchen and began slashing the family members' throats. Angry that he had to wait so long for them to die, he ordered his accomplices to hit them hard on the head. However, the accomplice refused. The assailant then grabbed a claw hammer and ruthlessly struck the family members repeatedly until they stopped moving. After removing Catherine Harvey's wedding ring, the assailants set the room on fire using wine as an accelerant to conceal evidence of their crimes. As they escaped from the scene, they ate a plate of freshly baked cookies from the kitchen counter and stole a laptop, DVD player, and other items. They rushed out and entered the getaway vehicle parked outside, where a woman was waiting. She was related to one of the robbers and had been on lookout duty during the incident. They quickly departed, leaving the scene as quietly as they had arrived. Later that day, around 1:30 p.m., Johnny arrived at the celebratory gathering. Upon opening the front door, he was met with a thick cloud of smoke and a strong burning smell. Alarmed, he alerted the neighbors. They quickly called 911. Firefighters arrived at the scene and put out the fire. However, they soon discovered 4 bodies in the smoldering basement. Despite initial appearances, investigators determined that the fire did not cause the deaths. Instead, they found evidence of a more sinister cause. The investigation was now treating the incident as a murder case. The scene was so heartbreaking that it left even the police and medical staff, who were accustomed to dealing with traumatic situations, utterly stunned and shocked. Some were even seen crying openly. The discovery that parents were made to watch their children being brutally killed, and that children were also forced to witness the brutal deaths of their parents, was especially devastating. Autopsies revealed that Brian and Catherine died from blunt force trauma to the head. Stella's death was caused by a combination of blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, suggesting she was still alive when the fire started. Ruby's cause of death was stab wounds to the neck and back, resulting in her death. The authorities immediately launched an investigation into the murders, but they had little evidence to work with. To gather more information, they appealed to the public for assistance. This approach proved successful when, on January 6, a woman named Latoya P.Y. contacted the police, requesting a welfare check on her friend, 21 years old Ashley Basil Tucker. Latoya expressed concerns that Ashley's boyfriend, 29 years old Ree Joseph Dandridge, and his uncle, 29 years old Ricky Javon Gray, were involved in the Harvey family's murder. Gray, who was slightly younger than his nephew by a few months, was reportedly the one in charge. The investigation took a significant turn when Latoya revealed that the 2 men had hidden evidence of their crimes at her residence. She disclosed that Gray and Dandridge had recently visited her home with a laptop that had an image of the Harvey family as its wallpaper. Given the extensive news coverage of the Harvey case, it was clear that the laptop belonged to the family. Latoya revealed information about the plan that Ashley, Gray and Dandridge had devised to rob Ashley's parents. According to the plan, Ashley would pretend to be a hostage, allowing Dandridge and Gray to extort money from the Purcell Tucker, Ashley's stepfather. This would make Ashley appear innocent, even though Latoya knew about the plan and was offered a role in it. However, Latoya became suspicious of the group and declined to participate. Later, when Latoya asked Gray and Dandridge about Ashley's whereabouts, they gave a cryptic response, saying, "Ashley has gone bye-bye." This increased Latoya's concerns, and she contacted the police. The information she provided was crucial in helping investigators connect the dots. When investigators arrived at the residence where Ashley lived with her mother, Mary Baskerville Tucker, and stepfather, Purcell Tucker, they found a gruesome scene. Inside the home, they discovered the lifeless bodies of all 3 victims, who had been subjected to a brutal and violent death, similar to the Harvey family. The victims were bound, gagged, and had their throats slit. Duct tape was wrapped tightly around their heads, causing additional suffering. Mary and Purcell had deep neck lacerations, and Purcell had a sock inserted into his throat. Ashley was found to have been suffocated with a plastic bag. The cause of death for all 3 victims was determined to be suffocation and torture. The police believed that the killer's primary motivation was a thrill-seeking desire, rather than any obvious personal benefit, so they worked together to catch them before they could hurt anyone else. Similar to the Harveys, Purcell and Mary live a quiet life with no known enemies. Percy works as a forklift driver, while Mary works for a cleaning service company. Their peaceful life was shattered by their daughter's betrayal, leading to the tragic death of a couple enjoying their golden years. Investigators quickly discovered a crucial connection between the Harvey family's case and the Tucker family's case. Ashley was found wearing Catherine's wedding band, which had been missing and taken from Catherine. With this revelation, urgent action was necessary to apprehend Gray and Dandridge before they could inflict further harm. Authorities tracked Gray and Dandridge back to their home state of Pennsylvania and apprehended them in Philadelphia on January 7, Dandridge claimed that Gray planned the murders and he just followed orders. When faced with these accusations, Gray provided explicit and disturbing details of the two family massacres, explaining that financial gain was the primary motivation behind their actions. Notably, during the Harvey family murders, he was under the influence of an illicit substance called PCP, also known as phencyclidine or angel dust. This potent drug is known to cause auditory and visual hallucinations and often leads to aggressive behavior. During his confession, Gray showed no emotion, maintaining a chilling stare. His indifference to the lives he took led investigators to view him as a ruthless and heartless individual. Additionally, it was discovered that Gray was responsible for the murder of his wife, Trevor Terrell Gray, whose body was found in a shallow grave in Washington, Pennsylvania. The couple, married for 6 months, lived together in a house owned by Trevor's family. They shared the home with Gray's nephew, Dandridge. Trevor's parents reported that the couple frequently had intense arguments. On the day Trevor's body was discovered, Gray had claw marks on his forearm. Initially, neither Gray nor Dandridge were considered suspects by the Washington police. Trevor's mother, Manna Squires, claimed that the police thought Trevor's death was due to a drug overdose, which led to a slow investigation. Trevor's death initially raised suspicions, but a thorough investigation did not occur until Gray confessed to the crime in 2006. On December 31, 2005, a violent assault occurred outside a home in Arlington. 2 men, later identified as Gray and Dandridge, attacked 26-year-old Ryan Key in front of his parents' house. The assault left Ryan with severe injuries, including stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms. He spent 2 weeks in a coma due to the near-fatal attack. Additionally, he permanently lost the use of his right arm. Gray and Dandridge faced multiple charges related of the Tuckers family killings. Gray was charged with 5 counts of capital murder, while Dandridge faced 3 counts of murder. Despite initially admitting to their involvement, both men pleaded not guilty. Gray's 6-month trial concluded with a guilty verdict on all counts. He received a life sentence for the murders of Brian and Catherine Harvey. The court also sentenced him to death for the brutal murders of Stella and Ruby. Following Gray's conviction in September 2006, Dandridge chose to accept a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in December 2006. Gray also faced charges in Culpeper County for the murder of Cheryl Warner, a 37-year-old mother of 3 who was found shot and hanged in her burning home. Gray pleaded not guilty, but the charge was later suspended due to conflicting evidence on June 4, 2008. Over the next 9 years, Gray's lawyers filed multiple appeals. They argued that Gray's traumatic childhood had affected his mental capacity. However, the Supreme Court rejected his case in 2016. As a result, Gray was scheduled to be executed on January 18, 2017. On the scheduled date, with all appeals exhausted, Gray was put to death by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center. Meanwhile, Dandridge remains in prison at Sussex 2 State Prison. The Harvey family's brutal murders sent shockwaves of horror and grief through the community. Over 1,400 people attended their memorial service, expressing condolences and sorrow outside Catherine's store. Flowers, dolls, and candles formed a poignant tribute along the curb outside the red brick house. The candles, lit by children, remained glowing for weeks. Catherine's brother Culp described the murders as a devastating blow that felt endless. He spoke about the pain of thinking about the family's final hours, saying that everyone was trying to move forward.